and get everything opened up by 1500. That's all I have. If there are any questions for me at all.
A couple comments before we take questions. First is, have you coordinated with the Litchfield Elementary School about this closure of the road? Because that road is the main place where people drop off their kids in the morning, starting at about 7:30. And it's the main place where they pick the kids up, which is, 2:30 or so. So that's if it's closed, that's going to be could be a huge problem for the school.
They're not in school right now, but the teachers are there.
So no school this week?
There's no school this week, but the teachers and faculty are there.
All right.
We did reach out to the school. They told us they were at 50%. They said they do have some students, but a lot of the students are actually going to be on the computers doing work from home. And although this will disrupt them a little bit, they're aware and have given us use of some parking lot usage if we needed it. At one point, we thought we were going to put a staging location for media somewhere. We've decided not to actually designate an area, but the school had offered up or was willing to let that it would be the northwest parking lot of their property. There will be 2 designated free speech areas, and our hope is that if people come to protest, that they utilize those areas, and we'll have people monitoring what's going on in those 2 areas. So you have pro Trump on the north side and against on the south side on the sidewalks, and so it'll be designated areas and monitored.
Okay, second comment is just is more for the council. One of the things that we had learned from the commander is that there's some equipment available that for a fairly reasonable cost, we can install card reader cameras at our entrances now, and maybe put in some technology that would help us to identify cars that either a car that may have been involved in some sort of a crime, or cars that just shouldn't be in the park, and the drivers of the cars may have outstanding warrants and things like that. So city manager, actually Assistant City Manager Williams, I believe, is looking into that technology, and I hope that he will be bringing us a report very shortly. He's smiling, and that's good, because we want to get this, we want to be able to take a look at this, because the numbers that I had heard are not that high, and it's technology that we may very well want to consider to put in so that we can, if we get in a situation like this mugging on Bird Lane, that we have the ability to identify that car very accurately and identify maybe the people in the car and the plates, the license plates on the car. So that will be coming back to you. I see Mr. City Manager has his hand up. So
I just want to let everyone know that we're working on the presentation now. I'm reviewing the presentation, and as soon as we're done with that, we should be ready to get it on the council agenda.
That's good. So we've made some progress on it. So that's great. We'll get that. Hopefully we'll have it on our next regular meeting, so we can consider it. Councilman Brainerd Watson, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, I did. I think I'm unmuted. Yeah.
Yes, you are.
First of all, thank you for looking into those cameras. That was something we brought up at the last meeting, and I'm really glad to hear you guys jumped right on that. Mr. Bratton, or I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Commander.
Commander, thank you. Lost the correct title and didn't want to refer to you wrong. It looked like the number of incidents was significantly higher than normal. Would you agree with that assessment, or?
As far as the thefts and burglaries specifically, yes, they are. They are considerably higher, and it's been not only affecting Litchfield Park, but all the surrounding areas. And so we are taking a proactive step, or I guess in a sense proactive, but we're reactionary to what's been going on. But statistically moving forward, we're trying to be proactive in hitting, and we have an analyst who puts together maps for us, looks at all the past, and then does some projections for us to give us a good idea of, where potentially the next crimes might occur, what time of day, what day of the week. So based off of that, information. We're trying to do some surveillance details out there to try to get some leads by making some arrests on catching them while they're out there in the process.
Good. And then I just wanted to make just a general statement, you know, that they don't pay you guys enough money for the job you do. And in these days when people are so quick to jump on and criticize with a broad brush an entire group of people on the actions of one person, it just, to me, is incredibly unfair what they're doing to the police organizations across the country. And I want you to know that at least and I'm sure, I feel like I speak for most of the council members, if not all, we stand behind you and value you and what you do for our community.
Thank you.
Okay, it looks like Councilman Donahue, you'd like to make a question?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to say here, Lisa, I agree and I concur with what you've said. Quick question. Some of this, certainly, we know there's much more population on the west side, and with more population, there can be more crime. But I wonder too, if you see this because we do have a, high unemployment, the COVID situation that has made people desperate and so forth. So I'm not saying, is this temporary? Because we certainly have more population, but does the incidence look similar to what happens when things like that happen? I don't know.
I would say yes. There are unemployment is higher. There are a lot of issues. A lot of these protests that have been happening, I think, are also a result of people not having better things to do in some cases. But in a lot of these cases, it ends up being one ring of criminals. And we're hopeful in some of the crimes that we're seeing, there are a lot of similarities. So we're hoping that it's either a ring or maybe a couple rings of the same characters. And so that's why if we can get this statistical data to kind of direct us to where we think they might hit and we can catch them in the act, we can, once we break up a ring, you'll see that drop off. That's what we're hopeful for. But you're right, with population rising, with a multitude of people coming here from other states, being displaced due to whether it be COVID or all of the disruption in all the other states, where it's, this is actually a really great place to be right now compared to some states. So we're seeing an influx of people that are fleeing some of that. And so it's hard to say what's causing it, but I do strongly believe it's probably a couple different groups. And if we can get into those groups and start breaking them up, we'll see a huge drop off.
Hey, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I am concerned. I've seen a lot of social media comments, people with fears, people with seeing things that are happening, people with concerns. And my concern is I don't want Litchfield to get a reputation that if you're going to raise hell, come to the park and do it because you're less likely to get caught than some of our neighboring cities. I'd like to be on the other end of that spectrum where they don't want to come here. They'd really go someplace else. So whatever we can do to get that reputation out there, I think I'd be for it. The camera issue we've spoke about before many years ago. And at that time, we really weren't having the problems that we're having now. And there was no support on the council for the cameras at the dozen or so entrances into the park. I think that probably has changed, and you can probably get that support. So, and like Mayor, as you mentioned, if there's simply license plate readers, that could be, probably very helpful. One of the concerns we had expressed by the police department in the past when we're talking about cameras is, what do you do with the massive amount of footage that these cameras are going to create? Who's going to be looking at it? Who's going to be filtering through it? But if it can be done with license plate readers of some sort that all happen by computer, that solves a lot of that problem that came up way back when. Thank you.
Yeah, I think all of those questions are things that we will address when the staff brings us a report. The way that I have understood it, and my understanding is, is without a huge amount of information directly from the companies, that the main thing these camera systems do, what they're aimed at doing is catching the license plate, and you can look at that information either after the fact or in more real time with the computer. It's also though capable. It's a camera, so it's capable of catching some video type information about the occupants of the car. So if you have an incident that happens, you have the ability to go back and take a look at that tape for some period of time. I mean, you're not going to keep it forever, but that data is something that would give us the ability for MCSO to go back and take a look at it and see what they can glean from the information we have captured in that system. So, but we'll get a full report from staff here in hopefully next month, and then see if it's something that looks like it's appropriate. Councilman Brainerd Watson, you have to unmute.
I'm sorry, I forgot I had two questions I wanted to throw your direction, Sean. First one was, how long are those temporary license plates good for?
You can purchase them for different time frames, but typically they're good for 30 days. Now they also, like if you buy a new car, they'll extend that out. They usually give you so many months, several months, because they anticipate that it's going to take time to get the hard plate back. So just to look at a temporary, you can't tell unless you see the actual date on it, and they're actually fairly easy to
Modify
and change. So, but they make them anywhere from 1 day to 30 days. People can go in and say, I just need to get my car down to MVD to have it emissioned. I just need a 1 day trip pass, and they can get that, or they can get a 30-day and so on. So it's kind of difficult to say.
And then this is just an idea I had, I raised a son. Thank God he's 30 years old now and I think he's gone past the horrible stage of development where he had no prefrontal lobe that said, stop, danger, Will Robinson. But when he started driving, one of the first things we did was we sat down and had this, you have some real important conversations with teenage kids. I mean, the obvious ones that everybody has and dreads. But we also had I had one with him about, what do you do if you have an accident and you have an officer who responds to the scene? What do you do if you get pulled over by a police officer? What if you think you're right and he tells you you're wrong? How do you handle yourself? And, the mantra I gave him was, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, whatever you want, sir. And then come home and we'll figure it out with a lawyer tomorrow if we need to. But, that's, I think, a big part of what's missing in our world today is that training. And I was just kind of mulling it over in my brain, wondering if there's not an opportunity for a public service announcement put out with the help of a school district and a police department, or, I don't know who the appropriate parties are, but, you could even kind of poke fun at the fact that you have to have that big conversation about, the S word, and then afterwards talk about police, because so many of these kids grow up thinking that, they can argue with adults because that's what they do at home. And as a former teacher, that's what they do with their teachers, and learn if they had the skill set to handle themselves as adults, maybe we wouldn't have so many interactions that go south,
Right.
And I don't know. I didn't know who to send it to. So I thought I'd throw it out to you. And if it has any merit at all, you can pass it up or down the food chain and see if somebody wants to nibble on it. But it seems to me like maybe that's one area of parenting that unfortunately society needs to pick up on.
Yeah, the talks I had with the city manager and the mayor, and I think it was Matthew that handles the block watch stuff. To me, that's extremely important. So I think if we step up a little bit more in the block watch area, get the deputies out there, get me out there, talk to them, and in the school, those are key things. I did a lot with a school up in Anthem, and I talked to the kids a lot, and it seemed to be actually when the more you have a police officer there, the more human they see you as opposed to a uniform and somebody of authority, the better connections you're going to make. And I also feel like it was all the kids that were troubled that seemed to gravitate toward the police, and there was a connection made. So it made a huge difference. They had a sense of respect, although maybe they were set on a direct path that wasn't so good. They still had some respect, and it did help a little bit. But I think some of those messages with Block Watch and being more active in the school, which I'll make sure that we do that.
Okay, thank you for your report. Let you guys know we appreciate what they do for us in our community, and that I think all the citizens support their efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
That'll take us to staff reports. We have a report from Paige Peterson, I think. I don't see her on my screen, but I'm assuming she's here.
She is here.
I don't hear her.
I just asked her to unmute.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I am here. I was getting some documents together real quick.
All right.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight I have for you the fiscal year 20 financial update. It's included in the council communication, so I thought I would just point out a few highlights of the year. We have finished 100% of the year, so this is a good benchmark to compare revenues and expenditures for the entire year. And we'll start out with the general fund. So the general fund revenues that we received in June were $10.1 million, which was 105% of what was budgeted of $9.6 million. So our sales and franchise taxes, which totaled $8.4 million, was still $200,000 over budget, which I thought was really good news considering COVID hit in March. Now, a significant portion of our increase in revenue was the Arizona CARES Act, because a portion of that was for public safety expenses from March through June, so that had to be applied to fiscal year 20. So it was just under $450,000. The net effect of the CARES Act is still the same, but a portion did apply to fiscal year 20. So in total, our revenues exceeded budget by 5%. We did see some categories that had a decrease, and I think we can directly attribute that to the COVID-19 pandemic, such as licenses and permits. They only came in at 82% of budget. Recreation was at 64%, and special events were at 95%. At the end, there is a detailed sales tax report, and I've gone over this the last couple months. I'll just touch on it real quickly. The collections were 10% higher in fiscal year 20 than in 19, and the bulk of that was retail sales at 22% higher. Unfortunately, our restaurants and bars did see a decrease of 6%, and some other smaller categories. Because of our non-disclosure agreement with Department of Revenue, we can't go into the big details of what businesses those are, but they did see a decrease of 7%. Construction sales tax was up 18%, which is really good. We all know that we consider that one-time revenue, so that's for one-time expenses such as capital costs. And if we look at our expenditures, expenditures in the general fund totaled $7.5 million, which was 89% of our budget overall, excluding operating contingency. So a good indication that we do run lean and mean, and departments are really good at keeping an eye on their budgets. So the net effect of increase in revenue and not spending 100% of our budgeted expenditures, the revenues over expenditures was $2.5 million. So that resulted in our general fund increasing by 3.6, bringing the total fund balance to $12.5 million. And this is in the report later, but I just like to point out that we have on hand 17.7 months worth of operating expenses, which is really incredible. GFOA recommends you have on hand 3 to 4 months. So we're doing really well, and that also fits in with our 5-year capital plan, that our fund balance can sustain our 5-year capital improvement plan. Is there any questions on the general fund before I move to special revenue fund?
I don't see any. Go ahead and move on, because I've got a question once you get completed. So go ahead, why don't you go
Okay.
ahead and finish?
Thank you, Mayor. The special revenue funds, I think the most significant special revenue fund we have is the Highway User Revenue Fund, or frequently known as HERF. Revenues received through June was $622,668, which was 153% of our budgeted projections, but that did include a one-time distribution of $197,802. Of that, we only spent $28,283 from the HERF fund last year for street maintenance. I believe a lot of the capital improvement projects were put on hold when COVID hit. So we do have a pretty significant fund balance in the HERF fund of $1.3 million. Our next special revenue fund are street lighting improvement districts. The assessed revenues were just under $156,000 and expenses were just over $231,000. And that was what we intended. Those funds accumulated a significant fund balance, and we wanted to bring that back down. The court enhancement fee had revenue and interest earnings of just under $8,000 and a transfer out to the general fund of $10,400, and that is to rent space from the city of Goodyear. So our fund balance in the court enhancement fee fund is $190,764. I should have pointed out when I started that these are the unaudited financials. So this is an estimate as the auditors begin the audit next month. There could be some changes, but I don't anticipate any significant changes. So the fund balance summary and our reserve balance, the total estimated citywide fund balance with all of our funds combined is $14 million. Of that, $1.5 million is restricted for the funds I just went over, the HERF-based streetlight improvement districts and court enhancement. So that leaves $12.5 million in the general fund. And I do have some charts that I can pull up really quick. Oops. Bear with me just a second. Oh, sorry, I'm having a hard time sharing this because my Citrix window at the top keeps taking over.
We have it now, Paige.
Oh, you've got it. Okay, well,
Revenue summary.
that's
Now we know.
That's my next, that's this year's revenue summary that I was going to get to next. But it is in your packet, so if you're okay with me not displaying that on the screen, there is the fund balance summary, and it summarizes everything in a chart form that I just went over for the fund balance summary, the general fund, and the special revenue fund. But I will be able to, after we're done with this, pull up sales tax for July and August of this year when we're ready to go over that. So I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
I just have a couple comments that I want. First is a comment generally to staff, and that is that I think it has been expressed to you from council that it is a priority to be spending these HERF monies on transportation projects that we have in our budget, we have in our plan. So I'm hopeful that you're putting a full court press on getting these projects, out for bid and getting back so we can get them awarded, because we do not want to see our HERF fund balances go up while we have work that needs to be done on our roads. So it's just a message to staff, to all of you, that this is not, it's not desirable to see that balance go up. The second thing is a question. If you look at the document that you were trying to put up on the screen that has, it's called the revenue summary. In the bottom part of that second half of that document, you'll see that we have months that are higher and months that are lower throughout our year, and it generally has to do with the economic activity that's going on in the valley because of it being during the cooler months, and so we have more visitors, and so that translates to more occupancy and activities at the wigwam, and it also translates to more activities throughout the state, so our state shared revenues can be impacted by it. So we have months that are higher, months that are lower. And it's really important that we get a projection from finance that looks at what our experience has been recently, realizing that type of economic activity has been down. So the travel and leisure industry, whether it's local at the resort or whether it's across the state, is down because of COVID. So if you look at the months of May and June and July and maybe August, certainly May, June, and July, you can get a sense for for some sort of a bottom line, baseline projection for what our revenues might look like for the whole year. And we need to take a look at that so we understand whether we need to continue to maintain such a high balance and have all these capital programs postponed. If we can spend money on the wall on Litchfield Road, then we need to do that. But we don't want to do that until we have an understanding from finance that this is what we think is most likely based upon what's happened during this COVID period. So now as we project out and go forward, our revenues in December, January, February, March, April are going to be down probably because of COVID. And if they are down, then it should be similar to these baseline months that we have. So if we could get that from you, I think it'd be very helpful for the council to be able to make a good judgment on what we want to do with these fund balances.
Sure, and thank you, Mayor. I do have July and August that I can share with you and discuss what I believe is going on. I did have a good chance to review the details of the July activity. I still need to review the details of the August activity.
That was like a teaser page. I got just about enough time to
I'm
get
having such a hard time getting my
enough time to
getting
get
the
focused
right
on the number, and
documents
then it got
pulled up.
switched.
That was August. I wanted to start with
July's up. Well,
July 1st.
July was on the screen.
Here
just
we
a
go.
second. There we go.
Okay. So we had, July was a really good month. Retail was 56% over July of 2019. Even restaurants and bars saw an increase of, small increase, but it was still an increase, which I thought was really positive considering what's going on of 2%. Utilities were up. And then these other smaller categories, they did see a decrease. Rentals 1%, and the other in total is 4%. But in total, not without construction, we had an increase of 32%. So I took a deeper dive into the retail sales because 56% that's a significant jump, especially considering we're in a pandemic. There are some taxpayers that are new to Litchfield Park that reported in here that did contribute to this, but there are also some businesses that have been around for a while in the retail category that had significant increases. So I think part of that is what was deemed essential businesses are still seeing quite an increase. I am going to reach out to DOR and try to see if I can get more information on the new to us sales taxpayers. There were 2 in there, and they are reporting all over the valley. So I don't know if that's something that is going to continue or if it should really be moved into like a one-time category. But even taking that out, we would still see quite an increase. So we're definitely we're feeling the effects of COVID in areas down here, but we're making up for it here. So I don't want to say there isn't an impact, because this 32% increase without COVID, it could be, who knows what it could have been. It could have been higher. But the net effect to us is we're still in a really good position.
The problem is what we have to do is compare these revenue revenue breakdown for July, and we need to take it back a year and look at May, say, of 2018. In May of 2018, we had revenues of $826,000 in that month. And typically what you see is that in these winter kind of months from January through May or June, but through May certainly, our revenues go up by 15 or 20% compared to earlier in the year, or either during the summer or during the area of like September, so October, that time frame. So what we need to do, I would like to see an analysis from you that looks at historically, basically our budget is our budget that we're working on right now has an amount of revenue in it per month. And the judgments that we made in the revenue per month was based upon our old history. So there's going to be larger amounts during the season, if you will, during the 4 or 5 months when we have a lot of tourism going on. Our revenues are higher in our budget than what is probably going to happen. And that we need to understand how much that is. How does that revenue that we would project, assuming that extra leisure and tourism component is not going to be available, it's going to be more like July of 2020, where we don't have that component, or June of 2020, how much difference is that going to make to our budget versus expenses? My suspicion is if we can make the judgment that we're stabilized at the kind of revenue levels every month over the next 12 months, they're like June or July, that while we're not going to create a huge surplus, we are in a spot where we can let some of these capital programs go forward because our fund balance is so high. But I think we need that information from finance so that we can make a responsible judgment that that's the case.
Okay. I will pull some more data and give you a better analysis next month, as well as what the exact budget was per month. I know there was a budgeted decrease for COVID, but I need to look at the details, and I'll have that ready for you.
All right, it would be very helpful, because we have some projects that we have postponed that have been on the drawing board, if you will, for a long time. And we've already invested all of the engineering time and everything we need to do except go out and have it bid has been done. So if we can get to the point where we feel comfortable and we can go ahead and move some of those projects forward, it will be very much appreciated by our residents.
Definitely. Just looking at it to where we are today, I would think I would feel comfortable with the city moving forward, but just seeing like our one-time revenues had a 188% increase in July, and August was good as well. But I will do put together a better analysis so the council can make a better decision moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions from council? Mr. Vice Mayor, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. Paige, on this tax revenue summary, you've given us 5 categories: retail sales, restaurant and bars, utilities, rentals, and other. What category does hotels fit under in that?
So if with our non-disclosure agreement with Department of Revenue, if there aren't more than 10 taxpayers that fall into a category, we're not allowed to disclose that category because it would be too easy to figure out what that business is. So it's lumped into the other. So that is where hotel fits, is in other. And the reason it hasn't been broke out that way is because it would identify publicly the sales of one business.
And would, if a business was a grocery store with a bar with a restaurant, is it going to sit under the restaurants and bars category and the retail sales, or just the retail sales?
Restaurant and bars will only fall under restaurant and bars. And the reason why we're able to break it out is there's more than 10 in that category. So it's not, somebody wouldn't be able to figure out what one restaurant business was doing based on this information. It's not included in retail.
Okay, but does every business only report under one category, or do they get divided up?
Oh, it's probably on
It
tax.
depends what, sorry, go ahead.
I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Say it's probably based on tax ID and the number that they're paying for on that, instead of categorizing it within each individual business line. So,
There's numerous lines on that sales tax form. At least
okay,
there used to be. That's why I was wondering.
Yeah, there are multiple categories, and it is self-reporting. So it is what the business reports to Department of Revenue. And so it depends on what the business's activities are. So if there was a restaurant that also had like a little storefront up front, they could very well be reporting the storefront under retail and their restaurant business under the restaurant and bar.
Okay. And my last question is internet sales. Where are they at in this?
It's also in retail. It's part of retail. I can get you what the online sales were. I don't have it right in front of me, but I can break that out and get it for you.
I think that would be very, very helpful, because this is a brand new concept for us that we haven't been into for all that long. It would be nice to see what's happening with trends. I mean, if that accounts for a lot of our increase in sales tax, that may be something that's around to stay. And I don't have a feeling for that at all.
Okay, I can prepare that for you. Thank you for the suggestion. That's a great idea.
Maybe it would be a good idea, Paige, to actually increase your line items so that you have 5 now and just go to 6 and add an internet line item so we could just see it.
Okay, I can do that.
Thank you. All right, any other questions from council? I can't see anybody's hands, so if there's a question, let me know. Because
Yeah, actually, this is Ann.
And go ahead.
I guess
Councilman Donovan.
this has to do with what the mayor just mentioned about HERF funds. So my first question is, do we have enough projects in the, in our budget to utilize most of those HERF funds now? Or I think HERF
The
funds
answer
can
is
also,
yes. We have plenty of projects
to use all of it?
to use all of it. We just need to get out and spend it.
So is some of that the new roundabout and the new road in?
It's all kinds of projects. I mean, look at the 10-year plan. There's, it's got, I don't know,
Okay,
what, $25 million worth of projects, and a good portion of them are transportation, so they qualify for HERF
and we received HERF funds each year depending on,
every year.
okay,
It's like $350,000 or $400,000 a year, some number like that. And
Yeah.
we've built up $1.3 million in balance because we haven't been spending it.
got it.
What's happened in the past, we have allocated it to be spent, and then the finance department before Paige did not actually encumber the HERF money. So we let the HERF balances get built up, which are restricted money that we can't use, and we
Right.
spend general fund money for it. So we're trying to get that, that turned around.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, this is Tom. I had a question.
Yes, Councilor Stossy.
Paige, I was just curious. I thought as you were flipping through your presentation pages, I saw one where you had August revenues. Do you have August revenues that you could share with us or not?
I do have that as well. So August, still a good month, 14%. In the retail category, 14% over August of 2019. But restaurant and bars did see a decrease of 5%. Utilities were down 2, rentals were down 1, but our other category was up 3. So in total, sales tax without construction was up 30%. And then construction alone was up 21%. So the net of those two together, we had a 28% increase over August of 2019. So fiscal year to date, if we combine July and August together, we have a 31% over July and August of 2019. And then construction has an 88% increase over July and August of 2019. So in total, 41% over July and August of 2019.
Okay, any other questions from council? Seeing no one speak up, Paige, thank you for your report. And I look forward to working with you next month to see if we can figure out where this next budget year looks like it's going to end up, as we go through the rest of 20 and into 21. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Next item is the consent agenda. Agenda item 5A through C. Is there any member of the council who would like to take any item of the consent agenda off of consent and have discussion? I'm looking for the vice mayor. Nope, vice mayor's good. How about everybody else? All right, is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda? Items 5A through C.
So moved.
Second.
I think it was moved by the vice mayor and seconded by, I'm not sure. Councilman Clare? Councilman Clare. All right, all those in favor of the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, consent agenda is adopted. Next item, we're going to take one item out of order so that our Wigwam manager, Katie, does not have to be here for everything. And that is item 6C. So we'll go to 6C and have a staff report from Tricia concerning Oktoberfest.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm here before you tonight. We've got 3 events on the agenda, and we'll start with Oktoberfest. As you mentioned, Katie Powers from the Wigwam is available for any questions as well. I'll give you a quick rundown of our council communication and then be open to any questions that council may have regarding the proposed very modified Oktoberfest. This year, we would be putting on an Oktoberfest. The tentative date is October 17th from 6 to 9 p.m. Unlike in previous years, this event would be an adults-only Oktoberfest. Under current COVID-19 guidelines and restrictions, we do believe it's just too difficult to safely offer children's activities. So the focus would be shifted to the 21 and over crowd. The crowd this year would also look much different if we move forward with the event. We have been building over the last few years up to a capacity of 1,400 on the lawn of the Wigwam. This year, we would scale that back significantly to 25% of lawn capacity, which would be 350 maximum adult attendees at the event. That would allow us to, we believe, properly social distance and lay the lawn out for attendees to feel comfortable. There would also be only reserved seating at Oktoberfest this year. The Wigwam's been able to provide seating options of tables for 2, 4, and 6. They could go up to tables for 10, as they do in restaurants. That would depend on council's comfort level if we move forward with the event. And we do have a site map as part of your council communication. I can check and see if I can share that with you all.
If not, we have it in our packets.
Okay, I think it's up on the screen for you. I'm not sure how great it is to look at on the screen. But But the table spacing would be at least 7 feet apart at minimum. Some of those are much more than that, based on this sample seating arrangement. There would be no gate sales or walk-ups. Tickets would have to be purchased online in advance through Eventbrite. So participants would select their group size and meal choices during their online purchase. They would get a featured German beer and a commemorative glass as part of their ticket. The Wigwam chef is still, as far as I know, working out details on the menu items, but if you have questions about that, Katie may be able to speak to that for us tonight. We do anticipate that the ticket price, unlike your usual pay your gate fee, get in and then purchase your food and beverages sort of a la carte at the event, it would be an all-encompass ticket that includes your meal, that initial beer, and the price of admission and entertainment. So it would probably be looking at a $40 to $50 per person ticket, which would be a different way to sell the event than in previous years. Face coverings would be required to enter the event and to move around in the event. Obviously, when small groups, families are seated at the tables, just like in a restaurant, they would not be required to wear the masks while they're socializing and eating and drinking with their small groups. In terms of controlled entry into the event, our city staff would work the gates as we've done in the past. We would be checking the tickets, checking IDs to make sure everyone is indeed over 21, and wristbanding the guests. From there, it would be Wigwam staff that is available to escort these small groups to their tables. The tables that people sit at would be theirs for the duration of the event. There's no table turnover. It's just, you come in, that's your family or your small group's seat for the night. You're there, you relax with your family and friends, enjoy the entertainment, and then you leave at your convenience. In terms of serving the food, when a party is ready to be served, they'll notify their server, and the server will check the tickets to confirm their entree choices. They will, Wigwam staff will bring the meals to each party. They'd be served in those plastic clamshell containers with lids that you see, similar to takeout, the nicer versions of those. Those would be utilized to minimize touch points and prevent food contamination. And chef would be using a food truck on site set back just for operational purposes. So you order your food in advance. You wouldn't be in a position to on site request an additional food item or an additional meal. So purchase in advance, and that's it for the meals. However, you would be able to add additional beverages. We'd have 2 bars on site. You can see them in the layout here, one south side and one on the north side. Guests would be able to, if they wanted to purchase more beer or non-alcoholic beverages, they can walk up. They'd be queued in front of those bars with 6 feet spacing markers if needed, if there's a small buildup of a line, and they'd be asked to return to their tables with their drinks and continue to enjoy socializing with their small group at their tables. We would have live music, just as we've done in the past. However, this time there would be no dance floor. People would just watch from their tables. So attendees, again, enjoy the entertainment and the company of their small group for the evening. Restrooms would be, attendees would be sent to restrooms inside the resort. There would be no porta potties. Wigwam feels they can control the sanitization and upkeep of the restrooms in their resort. So that would be the directions we would give attendees if they needed to use restrooms. And of course, we would work with MCSO and the Litchfield Park Posse to have a presence on site at Oktoberfest if we move forward with it, to ensure that people are following our guidelines for social distancing and security. And with that, I'll open Oktoberfest up to any questions that you may have for myself or for Katie Powers.
Questions from the council, although it might be helpful if you have something specific about this event, we want to, that you want to be able to ask Tricia or Katie, then we need to get that out. But we also, as a council, need to have a more general discussion about all three of these events in terms of what level of event are we willing to put on versus whatever risk factors there may be if we get, I think the number was 350. So we got 350 adults on the front lawn. There's definitely some risk in doing that. And there have been steps taken, I think, by the Wigwam and staff to mitigate that risk through the spacing of the tables and the no buffet type, eating. So you have service that's coming to the table itself, and through having the masks on if you're not at the table. So I think they've done everything that they can do to mitigate that risk. So it's a question from the council standpoint, from a policy standpoint first. Is the council willing to consider projects like this that has some inherent risk, but staff has taken the kinds of steps that I think experts that you listen to across the country would say these are the kinds of steps that mitigate the risk that's involved in it. So I'd kind of like to have input from council on that first, and then we'll go on to any specific questions you might have about this particular event. Who wants to volunteer? Looks like Brainerd Watson, Councilman Brainerd Watson.
I know you can never totally disclaim your liability, but can we put something on the tickets that, or in the information packet that they receive that says, here are the guidelines that we're following to minimize risk, and, you come at your own risk?
Yeah, we will do all the things that we need to do to make sure that our city is legally protected. And this is more of a policy issue of, do we as a city, how do we want to approach the rest of this period of time where we've got COVID risks? Do we just want to stay and not have any activities? Or is the council willing to take some risk because it appears to be mitigated in a way that is acceptable? Councilman Donahue.
Oh, well, I think that certainly kudos to Tricia and Katie, who have put together an incredible plan, but I don't think this is any different than eating at the restaurants. In fact, I think this is probably safer. And I think we're paying way more attention to this because we are responsible versus the restaurant owner. So to me, I think that certainly at this event appears to be in good shape.
Okay, other council members. Mr. Vice Mayor.
2 questions, Mayor. Do we have a mayor's emergency proclamation or a governor's proclamation still in effect that limits the size of events?
The last proclamation that I understood still is in place from the governor. The governor's limited groups to 50, but with the proviso that cities are able to look at specific events and okay those events to the extent that steps are taken to mitigate risks. And so we actually, as a city, have been looking at events at the golf course, for example. We just had a Fighter Country Partnership golf tournament that had, I don't know, it could have easily had 400 or 500 people at it. But the golf course put together a plan that the city reviewed and determined that it was a plan that reasonably mitigated the risks involved in those people, in that number of people. And it minimized any opportunity for anywhere near 50 people to be gathered ever together in one spot. So that's just an example. We've done other things at the golf course that are similar to that. We've had some events at the wigwam itself where there have been events inside the wigwam where there were more than 50 people, but we looked at the way the event was going to be operated and the rules that it was going to be under, the spacing that they had, and decided that it was reasonably, that the risks were being reasonably mitigated, and we've approved them. So the number's 50, but we have, as a city, we have okayed certain specific events at both the Wigwam Resort and at the golf course that are more than 50. I lost the vice mayor. Oh, there you are.
No,
On my screen.
oh, yeah, my mind is spinning. I guess one way to ask the same question that you were asking before is what the city policy from the council might be, would be to ask, you know, who would go on the council, who would go to this event and represent the city? How many people are interested in going and sitting there?
I'm going to tell you that I don't think there would be any problem getting 350 people from our community to go and do this. I'd be surprised if the Wigwam had trouble filling it. But again, I can't tell you that that's, you know, a for sure thing.
Yeah.
There have been activities that have been planned that went through the club, and there's been, I think, there's probably been more interest in the activities than what would be, what it was possible to, the people that were possible to, you know, to accommodate, let's say. So I mean, I think there would be a significant number of people who would like to go to this. Whether I would go is, you know, I can't tell you that today.
Could this be maybe an opportunity for us to see what kind of response we get from the community before we make a, you know, chart our path out for the rest of the holiday season and moving forward in the spring?
Yeah, this is not really charting a path, but I'm trying to get a sense of what the council, how does the council feel about this?
Yeah.
Because we have three items that are three items on the agenda that are all kind of similar, and in all cases, it's getting more than 50 people together. It's doing it in a way that staff is telling us they believe that the risks are reasonably mitigated. And now I'm asking council, from your standpoint, is this something you want to listen to and you want to think about, or is this something that we don't want staff to spend the time on? It's a decision really before, it's a kind of like a consensus or an understanding before we go in and look at these specific events. Councilman Donahue.
Well, I think that this, in my opinion, sets a picture of, you know, we're going to be developing the city center. We want people to come in. We want to be unique. In all three of these cases, it appears to be outside with masks, except if you're eating, all the rules in place. So I think from my end, you know, I don't know if you call it, it's not customer service, but it's certainly presenting a controlled, awesome picture from our city to say, we have this much space, we have these rules, we'd love to have you, and then go home. Sort of like city center. So it's maybe a preview of marketing for that. So in my opinion, I think that all three of these are outstanding plans, and they're following all the rules. They're outside, they're with masks, you know, it's controlled and so forth. Anyway, my opinion.
Councilman Clare.
In principle, I agree with Ann. I mean, I think the Wigwam's putting together some good proposals here along with the city, and all the protocols are being followed, and I see no reason to not do it if people want to take the chance to go. So I think it's a great opportunity to start to get a small sense of normalcy back, and I think we should go ahead and authorize.
All right, Councilman Stossy.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with the prior speakers. We've been over to the beaches in San Diego, and it's really interesting. You know, you can take a picture of the beaches in San Diego and they look really crowded, but when you're actually on the beaches, yeah, there's a lot of people there, but they're all spread out. There's nothing scary about it. I don't have any concern that I'm going to catch the virus out there. Everybody's spread out like they should be. We're outside, so I think as long as we're putting all our precautions in place, if people are nervous, they don't have to go. But I think as long as we're doing what we can to protect the people who go, then we're fine.
Okay. Anybody else? I can't think of, we've heard from everybody, I think.
Yeah, I just want to say I support it. I mean, I think it's a great idea and people are craving getting out to do something. So,
It's
Yeah.
not Sturgis, sure not Sturgis.
yeah.
That's to come. My concern was I wanted to make sure that everyone on the council had an opportunity to express their views on this topic in general before we just made kind of an assumption that we were just going to go down this path. It's a significant policy that I absolutely agree with the idea of trying to do these kinds of things, if we can just take the reasonable steps to mitigate the risk. So, but I didn't want to see the council not have an opportunity to weigh in on that. So now, does anyone have any questions about the plan for Oktoberfest for either Tricia or Katie Powers? Okay, I don't see any. Is there any further discussion about the proposal for the Oktoberfest event? If not, is there a motion to allow the special events department to work with the Wigwam to co-host a modified version of the Oktoberfest as it's been explained to us in this meeting tonight?
So moved.
Is there a second? It's like maybe Councilman Clare. So moved by Councilman Watson, second by Councilman Clare. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Okay, so Oktoberfest is approved. We have very similar proposals for the drive-in movie and the Fall Arts Festival. Are there questions about any of the specifics of those two events that we need to go over with Tricia? Or is the information provided in the packet sufficient that we can go ahead and entertain motions? Councilman Donahue.
I have one question. Tricia, I was looking online last night after looking at the agenda, and are there quite a few art festivals in the state that are going to be held? I don't know, Fountain Hills might be in the spring, but is that the status right now?
There are several that are moving forward, and Candy Vermillion from Vermillion Promotions, who is also on the call, has been diligently reaching out to other festival promoters and contacting them and kind of tracking where we're at. We're in keeping with the other festivals. Most of the ones, Fountain Hills, Tempe, 4th Avenue in Tucson, they're all at the same stage as we are, where they're in the process of presenting to their respective city councils to determine what comfort level their particular cities have in moving forward with events. But I do know that several have been moving forward. Prescott's held 3 already, actually.
Okay.
So far, from what we've heard, successfully for the artists and for the attendees in city. So we do believe with proper precautions in place, we too can safely do it as long as council is on board with it as well.
Thank you.
There are questions about either the drive-in movie or the Fall Arts Festival. Okay, seeing none, is there a motion to allow the Special Events Department to host a drive-in movie night in one of the city's public parking lots and to continue the planning to facilitate a modified version of the Litchfield Park Festival of Arts? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilman Donahue and seconded by Councilman Bernard Watson. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Raise your hand. Any opposed? All right. So items 6A, B, and C are all approved as presented. Next item of business is a public hearing on the Sun Health Minor General Plan Amendment and Rezoning Ordinance for 322 acres at the northwest corner of Litchfield Road and Camelback. Mr. Sanks, do you have a report?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, Council, members of the public and staff. We've got a few items on the agenda tonight related to the Sun Health project. It's project has been a long time coming. I'll give you a brief overview and then also present a PowerPoint. Let me bring up the PowerPoint now and make sure my screen sharing is working. 1 second. Okay. Here. One second. Great. So this is related to the project that they refer to as Rancho La Loma. It's the Sun Health campus. It's intended as a master plan subcommunity and it's dedicated to healthcare. What I'll be doing during this presentation is kind of toggling back and forth between the information that you have in your staff report, the information in my PowerPoint, and the information within the development plan booklet that you should have received as part of your council packet. The development plan booklet is the associated set of development standards and exhibits that Sun Health has provided as materials to support their addressing Terry. It sounds like how's my audio, guys? If you could let me know, do I need to be clear? Can you hear me all right? All right. So with the
Excuse me, Jason, you sound muffled.
I do sound muffled? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
I should sound better now. Okay.
Much. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I have like 4 different mics to select from. Thanks. All right. So the project came before us, and I'm going to toggle back over to the staff report. And if you look at the communication, it says about the background of the project. Let me see here. The project was filed back in 2016, actually, and the applicant received their first comments from staff on or around September 2nd. And since that time, the project has gone through a few iterations of review. On its 3rd submittal back in May of 2019, the Sun Health package was reformatted by a new consultant with Gree Pickett rather than the Swaback package that was prepared initially. And they reintroduced the project and brought it back in front of the council and in front of staff later that year. And ultimately where we're at today is for the most part the package that's been in front of staff and the public for the last year. So included in their request is a minor general plan amendment for the commercial acreage that you see on the slide above. You can see that it says commercial in the orange. Their request is just to really sweep it in and unify the project's underlying land use categories and promote its campus style development. You may recall, some of you, about 6 years ago, that commercial land use designation was established on the property when there was an interest in developing some commercial development, strip style development along Camelback Road, and that interest has since been abandoned, and they're getting back to the campus style environment that you see in your packets tonight. With the rezoning request, the acreages break down for the most part as follows. There's multiple parcels on the property that will be combined and further subdivided as development ensues in the future. The total acreage is about 320. 234 of that is a residential estate. It's proposed to go to public facility with a plan development overlay, as well as agritourism with a plan development overlay. The zoning request is illustrated here, where you can see on the left-hand side is the existing zoning map with the variety of zoning districts shown. And then over on the right, you'll see the residential estate, the public facility in the pink. You'll see they're existing in the hatch there. That's going to be public facility with the PD overlay as well. And then you'll see agritourism is still intended for the immediate northwest corner of Litchfield Road and Camelback Road. We spoke about this in a prior study session with the council. We talked about trying to isolate down through all of the exhibits and illustrations and presentations and PowerPoints. What are the residential dwelling units that are allowed on the property now with its current zoning of RE and public facility? This was presented to council through a study session, and to this day, the unit count remains the same. There's not been any significant changes since you last saw this. Under the current zoning, Sun Health could reasonably develop approximately 770 dwelling units. As proposed with this current rezoning request and their development plan and their conceptual development plan for 82 of those acres, we're looking at about a possibility of 1,146, 1,150 units. That includes the 152 existing units that are already on the property for the residents that are there. Their zoning map and their rezoning request, when illustrated, as you can see, is not super clear. It's a complex case. That is a plan development, which infers that it could be complex and unique. You'll see here that there's a dividing line that kind of crisscrosses the site, and this is the graduated density line. And everything in the blue to the west of that line will be limited to 2 dwelling units per acre as proposed. So as development proposals come in the future, primarily single-family detached residential development, those would be limited to 2 dwelling units per acre, but that density of 2 dwelling units per acre would be averaged over the acreage of this entire west side of the blue. What that means is there's going to be a significant portion, particularly in the blast zone area, that will remain undeveloped. And so that acreage will count towards, I would say, softening the density counts that you might find to the east of this line that kind of bisects the blue area. On the east side of this line, you'll see in the green, and the phases 1, 2, 3, and 4, that acreage there would be various forms of mixed use, primarily residential development of both condominiums, apartments, assisted living, congregate care, and then there could be some single family detached living. That area would be allowed to develop at 4 dwelling units per acre, averaged over the entire acreage of that east side. Here, the zoning district maps pulls off some of those details so you can kind of more clearly see the density and the zoning district subcategories. Those subcategories are called homestead and core. Homestead is the 2 dwelling units per acre on the west side. And again, that will be primarily single family detached homes with some single family attached homes. The core is on the east side, the more dense side. And that's where you're going to see more of the mixed use and the higher density residential proposed, the condominiums, the apartments, the cottages. They've got a number of different residential types that they foresee now and into the future. As part of the proposal, they've created a land use budget. On the left, you'll see the total number of dwelling units allowed, what's proposed with this development and the conceptual development plan that's part of this request, and then what's remaining. So that would be intended for future development. As that future development comes in and we receive additional conceptual development plans as the project eventually builds out, they'll be required to track the number of dwelling units that they're proposing for development against their budget so as not to exceed the amount that would be allowed if this project were to be approved tonight and an ordinance adopted next month. They've provided a list of permitted uses that are somewhat they're customized to this project based on what their needs for both allowed uses, assisted living. You can see public, private, civic buildings, independent living, of course, medical and memory care, skilled nursing. You'll have non-continuum of care uses, but they'll be related to apartments and vertically integrated uses. And then most of the commercial office and service uses are intended to support the residents on site, but would also in many ways be open to residents in the surrounding area. So you could go visit and perhaps visit family or friends that live there and partake in restaurants or dining or the golf course. Or you could even just be a Litchfield Park resident and go there and have lunch. There's a number of development standards and illustrations in the development plan that they've provided to us as part of their zoning request. One of which would be significant levels of detail related to how the project would look as it would build out. And one in particular was, for example, the Community Link Road. This would be a collector road that connects Camelback Road and Litchfield Road, as generally illustrated here in the small diagram. And they've given us a lot of details. So these are the types of details you would expect to see in a master plan community. I will bring up the booklet and share with you their development plan booklet. So just give me 1 second. I'm going to share. If I did here, just 1 second. Actually trying to find the development plan booklet. In any case, I'll just leave up what I have here. I'm not having such good luck with my Zoom. So I'm going to go back to the zoning districts map. And I want to talk about, or the conceptual development plan. I would like to talk to you about the structure in which they hope to process development with this case. So as we accepted the application and distributed for review and comments by staff and by the public, we discussed how they intend to build the project out, and with not having a perfect crystal ball of what Paul and his team would like to build on the campus, maybe 10 years from now, but rather knowing details about what they want to build in a portion of the campus now, we devised a way that they could provide us what they call a conceptual development plan. They didn't have a conceptual development plan for the entire project, but they really knew what they wanted to do was just on the area that you can see on the screen, and the blue and the green. The orange is the agritourism piece, the blue and the green are the variety of residential components. And I won't steal all of Carolyn's thunder, who's here to represent Paul, but they can go into details about what those residential housing units will look like and how they'll live. So as part of the projects moving forward with the rezoning case, what Sun Health did not want to do is submit a partial rezoning case, rezoning only a component or a portion of the 320 acre campus. They wanted to come in and get public facility zoning for the entire thing, the plan development overlay, but they only wanted to give us the details as shown here for the 82 acres, because that's really all they know what they want to do. Beyond that, what the future holds, they're not sure of. What they've agreed to do is require that development plans for everything outside of this 82 acres would still have to come forward to the council through a public hearing process to show those details as part of amendments to the ordinance. So that said,
Before you go too much further, just a quick question, Jason.
yes, of course.
There's 82 acres in the current, we have 82 acres in which they have given us something specific that they want to build. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and if I look at this land use budget and what's in phase one, it looks like in phase one, is that supposed to be all 82 acres, or what have they proposed in this phase one? Is that the 82 acres?
That's correct. Thank you, Mayor. If you look, I'm hoping you can see my mouse as I hover, but over here, you'll see your phase one acreages. This is about 11, this is about 30, and then this is about 43.31. If you add that up, that comes up to the 82 acres.
So AT is the area that's not residential. Is that
That's
correct?
correct. That's correct. It would be the agritourism. But they have residential components allowed, but it's not the predominant use of that district.
And then, so out of the 82 acres, there's 41 acres roughly that's predominantly residential.
That's correct. And that would be 42 acres of new residential. They're not including the acreage of the existing campus, medical offices, or approved community center.
And the density actually within that 41 acres is about 5.5 units per acre, correct? Roughly. The blue is 5 and the green is 6.
Correct. More or less, you're going to have 239 units spread across 40 acres. So that's correct. Now, I'll let them explain how they're assessing the population that would be associated with the assisted living proposal. There is an assisted living building that's going to be included in phase one as shown in the colored area. But I don't believe that they've counted those residents against their, quote, unit count. That's
the cross sections that you had up, that you have in the packet, and I guess you had on the screen here a minute also. Those cross sections for the streets, for example, are for this 82 acres.
The cross sections would apply to the entire development. So the development plan booklet that you have, I think it's about 29 pages, is the condensed version of what they initially submitted. And it would lay out all of the design guidelines, development standards, and that includes the street sections for collector streets and neighborhood streets throughout the project. And that lays the groundwork, or if you will, the map for future conceptual development plans that come in for the city council to review and approve. Those conceptual development plans would subsequently need to conform with those standards that are in your packet.
So in the ones that I saw in the packet, it looked like all of the sidewalks, they're all called sidewalks, not pathways, and they're all 6 feet as compared to our standard, which I think is 10. Is that correct?
For sidewalks, that's correct. In regards to separately identified pathways, I don't believe I have an exhibit related to that.
So they have some areas that they have sidewalks and some areas they have pathways?
I'll bring up I have, as part of, let me get to the exhibit. I do have an exhibit for that in your packet. I'm going to toggle over to it 1 second. All right. And for council members and the public that are viewing, this is the development plan packet. Sorry to make you dizzy by my scrolling. This includes all of the design guidelines, character and development standards that they are proposing with this project. And if you look here, this is their open space conceptual plan. And this illustrates where their park spaces will go and how they'll connect. And they have a concept of a connective trail system that they illustrate here with all of the yellow lines. And then if you go down and read through the open spaces, it goes through and conveys the kind of character traits and qualities and amenities that each tier of these spaces should provide.
I didn't see, I looked through all of this and I just did not see anything that where the pathways and the sidewalks were to the same widths as what we have been trying to maintain within the city. We have, we backed off on all of those kinds of things on the cache development, where we allowed, everything to be scrunched down in to allow the maximum number of units to be installed, or, to be built on the smallest amount of space. And, I believe that we're still headed on a path where, that community is just totally different from most everything else in the park. And certainly it has a lot of practical problems that we still are getting ready to deal with when it comes to parking and how, even a golf cart, the street's wide enough for a golf cart, but it's probably not wide enough for a car and a golf cart. So it's just, I'm concerned that that we don't go down this path without being very clear on what is it that's being proposed and how does it compare to the standards that we generally have within the rest of the park.
It's certainly, Mayor, I think that would be a big concern for what we're looking at right now, which is the 82 acres of conceptual development plan that's on the agenda tonight that shows the clustering of the higher density residential units. You reference the cache development, which is also a higher density multifamily style residential development. And the density in this project in certain pockets will significantly actually exceed what's in the cache development for the acreage that those units are located on. So if the concern is leading towards, we need to clearly identify a pathway system of larger than 6 foot wide sidewalks through the phases of development with this project, we can certainly do that. And that would layer into these design criteria that are already in front of you in your packet. We would just need to, I imagine, add a condition, if you will, to the draft ordinance that would address that at each level of development, each project shall address its attention to the pathway system as it should.
My concern is that we have something that's appropriate for who we think is going to be occupying these units. So if we have units that are, in which there are adults in the units that are not likely to be out walking around the community because their health is such that it doesn't, that's not their normal activity, you could at least make the argument that, well, maybe we don't need as much emphasis on a pathway, or if they're individuals who aren't going to be driving. A good example is Hacienda del Rey. We don't have as much parking at Hacienda del Rey as we would normally have for that type of development, but it isn't a problem because there's not that many cars that are being, that are at Hacienda that are part of the, that are owned by those residents. So taking into account who's going to be there is a valid, planning process, planning tool, if you will. But, if there's going to be areas where it's, certainly we're setting some guidelines that apply to this whole project. And there's some of this area that where we anticipate having, adults that have normal activity levels, then, we need to make sure that we provide the same kinds of amenities that we expect, in our other neighborhoods. And the council hasn't always done that. So we have kind of a mixture, and it's unfortunate.
Well, certainly, Mayor, we're at the very beginning too of should this project be successful at this initial zoning level, setting the expectations now that with each, what we would refer to for the council as a final development plan, that each final development plan, that's the package that's going to have the level of detail that you would need to see to confirm that pathways have been provided where appropriate, that's been accounted for and presented to you with each development plan that comes forward. You haven't seen one of those yet, but I will let you know that Sun Health, in preparation and hope, I guess, of being successful tonight, has submitted last week their first design review application related to this project, and based on the zoning shown, which would come to you as a final development plan in the next few months, I presume. So at that stage, we could detail for the council and the public how cart pathways have been reflected in those plans based on the community's goals for, non-traditional vehicular circulation or pedestrian circulation or golf cart circulation.
Along with the issues of the roadway widths and parking areas, so that we make sure that it's appropriate for the kinds of residents who are going to be there. So we don't build in a problem where you live there, but you can't park your vehicle anywhere near your residence.
Understood and noted.
I'm sorry to get it to break in there, but since we've stopped, is there any other questions from council of Jason while he's at this spot? Again, I can't see everybody's face, so.
Could I make
I see Ms. Goodwin, please.
Just a technical correction. The DRB package that gets approved by DRB is not the same as a final development plan. You will approve a final development plan in your legislative capacity. Minor point, but I think the record needs to be clear.
When is that approval, that legislative approval, when it gets into the area of things like pathway systems, roadway systems, cross sections, where people are going to park, those kinds of things? When are we going to do that?
We anticipate, the way it's currently laid out, is that the DRB package will come to you, and you may use that as part of your approval if you want for the final development plan, but the final development plan stands alone. So it comes to you, you're approving for this 82 acres, the conceptual development plan. A DRB package will be approved by DRB, and then ultimately the final development plan will be approved by the council. None of that will be approved until after the adoption of the ordinance, possibly at next month's meeting.
Thank you.
The consideration and introduction and adoption of this ordinance that we're considering tonight in this public hearing and later with the question for the council, that does not answer any of these questions that I've asked about pathway widths, pathway process. None of that's, we're not making any decision on that tonight or next month.
I think that the conceptual development plan that's finally approved next month possibly needs to address the concepts or the flexibility or the broad outline of what can be approved in terms of the pathway widths. The final development plan that will come to you subsequently would lay out the details, but I guess for myself, I want to be sure that the conceptual development plan is broad enough to include what you might do with those pathways.
We need to have some work done on so that we have the flexibility to be sure that circulation for all the different types of residents has been taken into account, whether it's somebody who wants to use a pathway or it's somebody who wants to park a car. Either one, we need to make sure that those are taken into account with these, cross sections. Other questions from the council at this point, or we'll go on?
I have a question. So in reference to what you just mentioned, how will they know that? They just know the percentage of age group, or, I mean, how do they decide that?
How do they decide what?
Prior to building, how many parking spaces and how, I mean, in relation to who's going to purchase and who's going to live there?
They have to have a detailed plan for what they're going to build and what, what their market is. The problem,
yes.
I mean, literally, we have a problem in Cache where you have people who have vehicles that cannot park them at their house. And so they're parking on Village Parkway because the way that the whole thing is structured. You have an HOA agreement that says you can't park on the street. You have a garage that will not hold, in some cases, even a big pickup truck won't fit in the garage. So there's a real problem. And we want to make sure that we don't repeat that, by just accepting the fact that, well, they're going to build to this general standard and they'll figure it out and it'll work out, because it may not work out.
This community will be a 55 and over, correct? But Cache is not, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just clarifying.
If I think of people 55 and over that I know, some of them own pickup trucks.
Right.
I mean, it just is what it is. So, and I just want to make sure that we take this stuff into account so we don't end up with, with something that we're not happy with when we get all done.
Mayor, if I may, I just wanted to say thanks to Susan for clarifying the difference between a design review application and a final development plan bundle, which is different. To give you some insight as to what that final development plan bundle could look like, it would usually include a detailed site plan. It would show hardscape design, pathways. It would show landscaping. You'd have a landscape plan with that. It generally includes the exterior building elevations of all of the buildings proposed, so you could look at the color materials and the architecture. And even so, I mean, if there's a concern that we're looking at communities where garages are simply too small, or things, Cache is a little bit odd in that they prohibit people from parking in their driveways. It's a Cache thing, and there are other communities they have that too, and they have parking problems in their other communities that I've heard about. We can look at those things and probe those questions to Sun Health with each final development plan to ensure that there's not these kind of unique, restrictions.
I'll give you a different example than Cache that is our situation in the city where we did not do our job properly. We have a development up on the 55 acres north of Fry's, in which we were concerned about the streetscapes and the widths of sidewalks, and we got convinced that, well, we're going to fix all of it. It's all going to be perfect because we're going to put in big, tall, mature trees, and it's going to be really beautiful. And then what happened is they built the subdivision, and they didn't do that. And then they left. They're gone. And we don't have our big, tall trees. So my concern is that we take these steps carefully as we go through this, and we make sure everybody understands what is it that we're concerned about. What are we going to do to try to mitigate that concern? And then we're going to make sure as a city that we follow up to make sure it actually happens. So go ahead. I'm sorry to have interrupted.
Oh, no, sir, that's really all I've got here. And I wanted to clarify kind of the unique process that is being considered for this project. Now, separate from the rezoning case that's in front of you, these 3 agenda items, there are concerns about, master plan community development that will be addressed separately under separate instrument related to a development agreement. So in case the public or others have questions about, when are you going to build a road, or who's paying for what, and at what time will you build this thing out? When's this link road, if you follow the mouse, this community link road, when's that going to be built? My understanding is that, those sorts of concerns or questions will be addressed specifically in the development agreement with technical documents that our city engineer will review and the council will also have an opportunity to look at. So right now they're just asking for a rezoning for the entire site. They're looking to get PF rezoning, just to recap, over the entire site except for the agritourism over here. A plan development overlay to create the development standards and uses and adopt design guidelines as you've seen in your packets. And then specifically for the 82 acres that we talked about, 42 of which is the higher density multifamily style product in the middle. that is shown, excuse me for scrolling again, here. That's the only more specific development plan that they have at this time. And they're, as they've expressed, motivated to get moving forward on the first phases of the phase 1 plan. And so with that, the next thing that you would see, should this be successful with council and the requests that are on your agenda tonight, you would see in the near future a final development plan for a portion of this 42 acres of multifamily development on a future agenda later this year.
One additional question, in the green area that is just to the west of the hilltop, where the city's property, which is there, is in white. There you go, right there. So in that area, how tall are the buildings proposed, and how dense are they?
Mayor, that's a good question. I don't have a conceptual development plan specifically for that. If I go to the rezoning case and look up here, I'll see that it is proposed to be the core. And I believe the development standards, just don't get nauseous, sorry for the scrolling, are 40 maximum building height, and the core would be 45 feet. So you could theoretically do 3 floors. And so you could have 3 floors, 45 feet throughout that area, as specified in their future development plans.
Do we have any idea how tall the hilltop is?
That's a good question as well. I'd almost have to defer to Woody if you would have any way to eyeball that or know the height of the hilltop in terms of topography.
We have those terraces that are on the west side of the hilltop. How tall are they? Are they going to be as tall as 45 feet?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm just speculating without knowing. I don't know that we've done any topographical surveys, and I don't know in any time recently. Perhaps if I could defer to Woody or another member of staff that might know about the hilltop elevations.
Yes, Mr. Engineer Woody Scouten.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I looked at that not too long ago, and I think it's somewhere in the order of 100 to 120 feet above the intersection of Camelback and Litchfield Road, because I was looking at water pressure up in that area. So it would be well above, well, let's see. The property obviously slopes up to the hilltop, and then there's a relatively steep slope. So 45-foot tall building may infringe on the views from the hilltop.
I think it's something that we need to at least understand what we're doing as we start building right next to the hilltop. It may be that we have to remember some of the planning things we've done in the past where we looked at tents. So we have graduated height from the street. We have a graduated height as we go into a project. And it may be that we have to do something like that in these areas also to protect that hilltop and protect the investment that's being made by the Historic Society and potentially by the Rotary Club that we actually have. We're able to preserve at least some of the of the views from that property.
Mayor, if I may, the one way we could address that is as the project brings development plans in, when they know what they really want to do in that specific area, as part of you have some, I don't know if it's leverage or provision to ask them to prepare a line of sight exhibit so they could show you in advance of waiting for it to get built and just going to check it out. You could do a line of sight exhibit that would show to scale what the view corridor would be from those sensitive areas. And that could be part of the development plan that they're obligated to provide you through development agreement terms.
My concern is we get these kinds of issues or questions on the record and get them to the forefront within staff, because at the end of the day, staff is the one that drives all of this, and it comes to us and we make a decision with a relatively quick decision based on the amount of detail that's involved in this stuff. So we've got to make sure that we provide for those kinds of things as we go forward. And not end up losing a treasure in that hilltop because we don't think about things like view corridors.
I would suggest then for anything that's shown in the core area, just to be safe, that for any submittal checklist for final development plan, that we put something in what we provide them, saying, here's your checklist, you've got a project coming in for core. We recognize that, make sure that if it's, we take a look at it prior to submittal, and that you have to give us a line of sight exhibit if we perceive that it's necessary based on its location in the core.
All right, so is that something Susan needs to include in the development agreement, or you need to include in the planning checklist, or both?
I think minimum of planning checklist. I don't know that there needs to be the ability to have the discretion to do it and the reminder to do so and not forget it. So you don't get something on your agenda that hasn't been vetted already. So I would suggest that it goes on the planning checklist.
Okay, all right. Other questions from Council of Jason? Mr. Vice Mayor.
Somebody unmuted me. Okay. I got a few questions. Page 109 of the packet, there's a paragraph B and a paragraph D and no paragraph C. Paragraph C might be the Camelback Road packet. Paragraph B of the ordinance says that failure to complete dedication could result in reversion of the zoning. But Camelback Road doesn't have that language in it. Why?
Vice Mayor, you have a good eye. I believe that there's a proposal to amend some language in the draft ordinance. Susan's aware of it, and the Sun Health representative, Carolyn, the attorney, will probably discuss that. Susan, did you want to chime in on the language on the right-of-way dedications and improvements?
No, only that Woody has agreed to some modifications of it, and I think Carolyn's going to present that, an alternative to that section.
Okay. My second question is, and we had this discussion before, and I think the mayor kind of alluded to it. There's a proposal to go from 770 doors to 1146 doors. And that's going to leave a lot of empty land around. It's loosely, it seems, referred to as open space. How do we guarantee that land stays as open space and they don't come back to us in 12 months and ask to put another 500 doors in that open space?
You can't guarantee that they won't ask for it.
Okay.
You're not required to approve it.
And we put something in the agreement somewhere so that the councils after us can, without pulling out minutes, and nobody seems to be able to find the language, they can pull out the ordinance or the development agreement, and they can see that we talked about that. And that was our understanding in our agreement with the developer.
There is language in the development agreement. I'll go back and look at it to be sure it addresses what you're concerned with, but any future council can change that. All you can give them is the history of why it's there so that they think about it before they do that.
Exactly. And we've had some recent input from citizens that there was prior language in prior deals with this applicant that nobody seems to be able to find. So I'd just like to have it at the forefront so if anybody ever does want to see it, at least they know we talked about it and it was there. My next question, is there somewhere in this agreement or the zoning ordinance that provides that if there's no development or partial development that the rest of the zoning reverts? Or we have a right to revert it?
I would defer to Susan on the legality of reversionary zoning.
The development agreement has, the development agreement provides for if a phase is not developed, it may be reverted. Are you talking about something different?
No, what's a phase? Do we know what a phase is?
Phasing, there is,
Hayes is
If a
80.
final development plan, I'm sorry, if a final development plan that is approved is not developed within the period of time set forth in the schedule for that final development plan, then it can be reverted.
Are we
No.
anticipating, we're being asked to rezone the entire 300 and some odd acres. So then
Yes, Mayor.
they come to us with a plan to develop 40. And and then another 40, and then a 20 and a 10. So there's really no, if we don't get a master development plan, there would never be a right to revert.
I don't understand what you just said. There's not a master development plan involved in this particular application. It's individual final development plans.
Okay, so then there would never be any right of reversion.
No. I'll have to find the language, but I want to go back and explain a little bit of history, because I don't think the council really does know this. Originally, I think I was concerned with the rezoning application being processed and approved for the entire 322 acres. PF and AT with a PD overlay, when there is nothing to put into the PD overlay because there's no plan for much of the property. Carolyn Oberholzer asked me a good question, and that was, well, why can't we just approve the entire 322 acres and then we'll deal with development as it comes along? And I said, well, we can do that if the council wants to rezone the entire 322 acres without a master plan for what it's going to look like, but only if each segment, each final development plan, conceptual development plan, and final development plan is treated as kind of a little through the zoning process. And so I said, that's workable. I don't know if the council wants to do that, but we can do that. And I can create a way to figure, I can create that in the development agreement. So it's not, the request to you is the entire 322 acres. I guess what I'm saying is it's been a little cumbersome trying to fit the concept of rezoning the 322 acres without having a master development plan, as you normally would in a PD overlay. So you don't have to approve the entire 322 acres, but that's what the request is. And that's why it sounds cumbersome, because there is no plan for the rest, and they'll come along one at a time.
It is cumbersome. And like what I'm trying to avoid is something where this applicant has already done to us. And that is to say, look, I've got the right to do this under the current zoning code right now. So, you know, I'm just going to go do blah, blah, blah. So if we're going to give them blanket zoning on the 320 with no plan and give them speculative zoning on it, Susan, you need to develop some teeth and possibly a way to revert if necessary.
Okay, I've got the language that I was trying to find. It is in the zoning ordinance. It's the last paragraph, is paragraph G. And it says, if at the expiration of the period established in a final development plan, the property has not been improved for the use for which it was conditionally approved, the city council, after notification by certified mail to the developer, shall schedule a public hearing, which is required by the statute, shall schedule a public hearing to take administrative action to extend, remove, determine compliance with the schedule for development, and may revoke its approval of that final development plan.
So the zoning stays. Now we have zoning for 320 acres with no development plan.
Well, except what happens is that under other parts of the ordinance, it says that there will be no development for any portion that doesn't have a final development plan. So it's got an empty shell.
The problem, Susan, is we had originally, if you go back far enough, this property was probably R43. And then it was all changed and it was entitled for 700 units apparently. But with no plans and no reversion if nothing was ever built. So now when we're looking at it, look at this, it's not like there's a brand new plan that wants to come in and build, 1,146 units. It is only being discussed as a change from 770 units to 1146. Because because the councils in the past gave them an entitlement that they became, that became their property right, as opposed to be, and never required them to have any kind of development on it. So it was totally speculative zoning, and they didn't have to worry about building on it, and they never had to worry about any type of reversion if they didn't build on it. And so we can do the same thing here, where we grant zoning on 322 acres. We only have a development plan that goes to 82 acres, and the other sits, and it just becomes an entitlement that they have in their, that they have in their bank account. And then when they get they decide finally to build something, they say, well, we have the right to build 1,146 units. Now we really need to go to 1,400 units. We're going to change the whole thing around. And then we're not making that big a change because we're only going from what we have now to what we need. It's a different way of, we're providing a significant benefit, I think, in terms of the entitlement without any assurance that there's going to be building on it.
If I may, Mayor, I think you're certainly correct. There is an ask here. They're asking to go up to 400 units or so or more in development rights, right? You've got 7-something on the table. I think the history with the zoning, and Susan, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, we have a statutory requirement to establish equivalent Litchfield Park zoning when we annex property from the county. So if it came over as from rural 43 to RE, at the time, that would have been the closest equivalent zoning district that we had to offer them. And so it just transferred the development rights as close as possible so that they weren't losing development rights when they came into the city. I don't know beyond that, Susan, if there was any development intent with the RE zoning or if that was just establishing as protocol requires the equivalent city zoning.
I don't know.
Usually when you annex, by the statutory requirement, you have to establish equivalent city zoning.
Well, you're saying the equivalent city zoning would have been less than one house per acre?
Well, my understanding is that when you annex, you have to initiate a zoning case that goes companion with the annexation so that within 6 months of annexation, you've established city zoning on the property, and that city zoning should be the equivalent, closest equivalent that the city offers to where it came from in the county, whatever that was originally. Beyond that, the developer, the owner of the property can initiate a zoning case as they've done for this case that's in front of you tonight. And in this case, this is where they're really asking for the ask. They're asking to go from 770 units of development rights they probably had for some time to 1,100 plus. So that is
where do you think those 770 came from? If not, it wasn't a zoning. It's 770 units on 320, 320 acres, right?
Yeah, that's where when the property was annexed, whatever happened with that zoning case at the time.
Does it go back that far? Because I thought there was a step in between the annexation.
There was a residential estate zoning case, as I recall, but
okay.
I don't know. I have to go back and look.
So I have a question, Mayor.
Yes, Councilman Donahue.
I'm a little confused. I have to be honest. Is what you and Paul are basically saying is we should just approve 82 acres because there is a plan for that versus all three?
I think that what we're concerned about is that I'm not concerned about doing the whole 322 with the concept of them bringing specific plans in for the next phase when they get ready to build the next phase. But I am concerned that I don't want to have this property set for 5 or 6 or 7 years with no activity on it, and then have these entitlements come back to bite a later city council in a way that was not anticipated. So if it's going to get built, then I'm fine. Just if we're going to go through a phased approach and actually try to build something on this property, that's a benefit to getting it, getting the city built out. And quite frankly, until we get the whole mix of people on this 322 acres, building the 82 acres to expand more assisted living type facilities is problematic from a cost standpoint. So, it's not, if the rest of it sits undeveloped, it really has a very high potential to cause some significant cost issues.
Because the 82 acres, the plan Jason has just shown us is showing us the number of units and the size and so forth is of just the 82, correct?
Correct. It's 82 only.
Okay.
But it's basically taking 100. We currently have 152 units.
Yeah.
We'd have to go back down from what he's got on the screen now. And I think we're going from 152 to, adding like 430 or something. Or 400.
In those 82 acres.
Correct.
Yeah, you and Paul are concerned about whatever 322 minus 82, I don't know.
I'm concerned about when is the rest of it going to get developed, because when you look at the cost model of what this community is going to have represent to the city, one of the inputs from a income standpoint is state shared revenue. Most of the state shared revenue that doesn't have any unusual cost features to it is in the rest of this property. It's not in this 82. The 82 acres are very expensive kinds of residents for a small city like us.
So is their plan to begin building, if they got approved, the 82 acres got approved tonight, their plan is to begin building as soon as possible? I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm surprised we haven't asked this question before tonight, that I just assumed they were developing the whole shebang. So that's why I'm confused.
It's been asked by staff over the entire process with them. So it's not like it's just it's like a brand new problem. That's what Susan and Carol have been working on in terms of how to deal with at least some of the issues.
Mayor?
Councilman Brainerd Watson.
Since Paul Vanderveen's, in the audience, can we ask him to, explain some of these things?
Yeah, he's going to make a presentation in just a few minutes, so I'm assuming that he's listening to these questions. So yes, we're going to talk with him.
If I may, Mayor, I wanted to reaffirm that certainly it is correct that the request for phase one as shown is generally considered the most intense portion of the overall master plan development, and they are asking to come in and do that first. So that's correct. It's anticipated that the portions that are in future conceptual development plans, basically the area shown in white on your screen, would be lower density, more independent living development. What's shown in the core is higher intensity, trending towards more necessary, independent living and then assisted living type of care.
Right. So are there any other questions of staff from the council?
Can I finish?
Yes, you can. If you weren't finished, I apologize, Mr. Vice Mayor.
No problem. Susan, what is the status of the development agreement?
I'm trying very hard to get it out to Carolyn soon. An issue came up today that I was not very familiar with, and I'm drafting around that. It would be my goal. You and the mayor and Ron at least have seen a draft as of about 2 weeks ago. There's a few revisions from that. I have a few more to make tomorrow, and I was going to send it out to Carolyn addressing those issues, subject to obviously, further review by the council.
And the intent is to have that finalized and adopted contemporaneous with this rezoning ordinance and final vote?
Yes.
Okay. My next question is, Jason, you said something that I need you to expand upon. You said that the assisted living that they want to do is not included in this 1,146 population count.
Vice Mayor, I think what I need to do is ask for Carolyn and Paul to confirm. When we were looking at the conceptual development plan on here, there is, if you look at the plan closely, you know, we're talking about cottages and apartments and, you know, various forms of multifamily development with various levels of care. And one part of the conceptual development plan on 82 acres that says there's an assisted living component. I'm not 100% clear whether those units are included in the total unit count. A lot of times assisted living facilities are considered care facilities rather than like a residential building. And so I need to make sure that we understand the impact of those residents and those doors, if you will, on this. So I'll have to defer to Carolyn on that.
Can that be in the development agreement or in the rezoning ordinance? If we're given permission to use the property for certain density? Isn't that why we're here in the first place?
Oh, certainly, Vice Mayor. What we're doing is we're starting to cross over between residential units and into almost like nursing home environments. And so a lot of times nursing home environments aren't considered as a bunch of residential units, rather they're like in a medical facility. So we'll need to talk about how many people that they hope to have as an assisted living environment as they build out.
Should that not be mentioned in the ordinance or the development agreement? Or is that just a blank that they can go to the sky?
Well, you know, it's interesting. It's an allowed use within the project. It's allowed use in public facility and continuum of care. So we consider it as like assisted living is counted as doors, but like I should clarify assisted living versus skilled nursing. Assisted living could be, you know, there's different gradations in the continuum of care spectrum. And at some point it trends over to a medical facility, depending when you get to that level of care. I think, like I said, it would be helpful if we had Paul or Carolyn is here to represent Sun Health. Paul may speak, talk about how they've managed units versus doors.
Okay, Mike, had one more question. The blast area, Susan, we're talking about putting 2 dwellings per acre up against the line. And as I understand, that line is not a line where any blast stops. It's a guesstimated marker as to where maybe nobody's killed beyond that point, but still there will be injuries and building damage. It would seem that there should be some protection or berming or something. At what stage would we require berming or some kind of design protection?
That is exactly the issue that I was working on earlier today. I think Woody would be the best person to address the details of how we might handle that. Can you do that, Woody?
Sure. Mayor and Council, we have from Luke Air Force Base a description of that line, which is that should there be mass explosion of all of the munitions stored there, there will be an overpressure of about 1 psi, which will cause structural damage of about 5% of the structure and injuries from to the occupants due to flying glass and debris from the structure itself. So, and the Air Force has said that, and I have verified that independently by reviewing some of the DoD, Department of Defense documents regarding safety protocols for munition storage. So what I have suggested, the best way to handle this is, and let me just say that you're right, the blast does not stop at that line, it keeps on going. But apparently what the Air Force has done, or Department of Defense has done, has said, at that line, we have minimized major structural damage and fatalities for occupants of buildings. But, you know, if all those munitions blew up, I would guess that there would be some damage to the existing Sun Health buildings. It might just be the windows blown out, but, you know, certainly there would be damage from the blast wave. So what I suggested is that we require Sun Health to hire a consultant who is an expert in munitions, the effects of munitions explosions, and come up with some recommendations as to location, structural design, and other mitigating factors such as berming that could be done to prevent major structural damage or any damage and any injuries. And I think that's the best we can do at this point, because nobody has looked at it in detail for this particular situation. Now, I did ask Goodyear what they did with respect to Palm Valley Phase 9, which is right next to Sun Health, and basically got no answer. So I think we're plowing a little bit of new ground here.
What is that line on that you've got the cursor on?
That line is it's referred to as the QD arc, which means quantity distance arc. And it was defined originally in 1957 with an easement that was recorded on the Denny's property that basically said on the Luke Air Force Base side of this line, you cannot build habitable structures. You can't have groups of more than 25 at a time, and a couple other things. So it was the Air Force's way of saying, we don't want you close enough to where there will be buildings blown apart and fatalities.
That's a blast line, not a noise line.
It's a blast line. That's correct.
Is it part of that same circle we've been looking at the other side up there?
That's right. It's a 2,320-foot arc. I don't know exactly where the center point is, but I suppose it's somewhere in the middle of their munitions storage area. That agrees very, very closely to what the Department of Defense has published in terms of the amount of distance that you want to be away from 150 to 200,000 pounds of munitions in storage in these typical earth-covered structures, and still only sustain about a 1 PSI overpressure.
And is that 1 PSI at the line? You were talking about glass and buildings and damage and 1 PSI. Is that where you're guesstimating that 1 PSI would be at that circle arc?
That's right. Yeah, what they're saying is, I mean, it's very, very detailed, very rigorous analysis, but basically what they're saying is that we have certain types of ammunition and explosives stored here, and we have a certain weight of those munitions. And if it all goes up at once, we want to limit people from being inside the area of 1 PSI overpressure or more. And they define 1 PSI, actually it's a range 0.9 to 1.2, but I just call it 1 PSI, as potentially causing damage to structures up to 5% of their replacement value and injuries to occupants due to flying glass and building debris.
When Unidynamics was doing this during the Vietnam War and creating all those explosives down there, they had blowout buildings surrounded by berms with the concept if something went up, it would not take out the houses across the street. is that something you're thinking about? What you're looking at?
Well, I am certainly not an expert in mitigating the effects of munitions blasts. So that's why I recommended that we require the developer to go find an expert as a consultant and come up with recommendations as to how to minimize damage, or, actually our goal should be zero damage and zero injuries for people living on this property, or employees or visitors to the property, if there's the worst case scenario of all of that munitions exploding. So rather than us trying to tackle it as lay people, I think it would be best to have a consultant who's an expert.
Okay, that's all I got. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from council? All right, have we, Ms. City Clerk, did we have any requests to make a public comment from the public? Anybody from the public actually show up that wants to make a comment?
I have not received any requests, Mayor.
All right. Then we'll go on and see if the applicant has anything that he wants to present that in this at this stage of the public hearing.
Mayor and council members, it's Carolyn Oberholzer again from Bergen, Frigg, Smalley and Oberholzer, 4343 East Camelback. On behalf of Sun Health this evening, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to speak and hopefully present a very brief supplemental presentation. I'm going to try and share my screen. Let's see if I can successfully do that. I'm going to not, I've listened intently to everything that's been discussed. I won't re-review what's already been asked and answered. I try to focus on the unanswered questions, but also wanted to supplement those with a bit of information on the context. As you know, Paul is also available and our engineering and design team as well. So the existing campus is a mixture of 1, 2, and 3-story buildings. And I have some graphics on the screen. I know you're all familiar with them, and I know you've heard from us before about the improvements that they've made over the past year, a $4 million investment on the interior renovations of these buildings. And when the question was posed as to, what is it that we are trying to do most next? What is the pressure on this development? And Susan and I worked through the idea of this double process where it is recognizing that to the questions on the size of this, so we're establishing some base framework on the size and the underlying zoning, but that every single development plan going forward will come back before you with a very specific level of detail. And to the extent that the zoning ordinance is not deviated from in the development standards in our booklet, then the city's standards would govern. So to the question of paths, we would be incorporating the city's standard path width within the open space areas of the project. So things like that, where the development booklet is silent, that's where your code picks up and governs. So one of the things that is certainly interesting about how the property has developed, I understand the concern of you don't want to see fits and starts, is, we do have the medical office building down on Camelback, 100% occupied. And these two portions of the property operate fairly independently. So earlier this year, we went to DRB with the community center plan, and that's down at Camelback, just west of the MOB, this building. So this is the community center plan. It's modern architecture, very low scale, but it's an 18,500 square foot community center. It would serve as a restaurant for the residents of the existing facility, but also the new residents, and serve as an event center for the rest of the community. And to tie that all together, this is due north. This is the residential area of phase 1. Phase 1, as we'll go into the greater detailed maps that you guys were reviewing earlier, but what's important to note about phase 1, and I'm going to launch, pardon me, the slideshow I have some phased graphics coming in. Are you able to see my cursor?
Yes.
You are? Okay. So here's the existing residential buildings. The community center is over here. And across the street, this is a complex of duplexes. These are large house homes, which are 5 units each. And then these 2 buildings back here are the loft buildings, which are 16 units each. So these range from 1, 2, and 3-story buildings, similar to the one.
Carolyn, I need to interrupt just in case I messed up and did not publicly declare that this is a public hearing. My city clerk is concerned that I didn't use those magic words, or if I did, she missed them. Either way, I need to just announce to everyone, I'm going to wrap. You can hear that I'm rapping on my table, that this is a public hearing concerning the Sun Health minor general plan amendment and rezoning ordinance for 322 acres. So with that announcement, please continue. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. That's an important detail, and I appreciate it. So the plan before you is actually what has been included in the development or design review package submitted that Jason referenced earlier. And this is what would come to you in very great detail, hopefully next month, concurrent with the zoning. There's a fully baked site plan, there's landscape plans, and all of the detail that I think you guys are looking for. This area, I'm going to go to the next slide and we can go back and forth as much as you guys need to. So back to the color coded 82 acres. The agritourism piece is the farm to fork, and that's the farming areas you see on the west side of it, retail market village. That is, although allocated the possibility of future dwelling units, none are included within this development proposal. The development proposal with the green and the blue, the area that I just showed you on the area is predominantly in the green space. And it's in this green area. Again, here's the community center. Here's all the existing buildings. So it's just this area here, in addition to these 2 buildings here. Those are those 16-unit loft buildings. All of this that we're showing to you, these are all independent living units. So as to assisted living and then skilled nursing, those are like the 3 layers of resident status. Skilled nursing is not a resident. It's also not a component of this phase 1 development plan. There are skilled nursing beds currently on the campus, and they served over 350 non-La Loma residents last year in a short-term rehabilitation phase. But there are no skilled nursing beds proposed with this. There are no assisted living beds, or pardon me, units included within the development plan that was submitted for this next phase. But that's not to say that they wouldn't be included in a later portion, which is this northern portion. Those units are permitted differently by the state, but for purposes of the zoning, they're treated as development units. So what we're talking about in terms of units, it all counts the same. So they are not accepted or excluded. They are just not a component of this next phase that's coming hopefully before you guys. So getting into the detail of what is included in that, in the oval area here, this is again where the combination of you have what they're calling the large house concept. Those are 5 units that are accessed by an internal elevator. There are duplexes, and these are the 2 architectural styles for the duplexes to marry the modern, newer architecture and the more traditional architecture. There are, in this blue square, again, the loft concept, and those are 16-unit buildings with garage on the ground floor and living units on the upper floors. So the renderings that are included have gone from, these were the earlier renderings. These have evolved from the larger house to this architecture. Again, this is included in the package that's on file with the city now. The duplexes from this sketch to what was, again, just shown on your map earlier, as well as this hybrid loft concept. These are other views so you can see how it looks on from the other sides. And this is, again, parked both internally and with exterior lots. And that is part of the package that's included, is that graphic right there. So all told, in this area, if I go back to what we're talking about in this phase 1 development, is sub-phases. So this area is the most imminent development to occur, but of course we need to create the community link road and the infrastructure around it. Those cross sections are what are a component of the zoning ordinance, so those would be governed by that. But how all of the interior development works will be consistent with the design guidelines and be subject to your review. Again, so that makes this project very different from other projects, because the ultimate design package comes to council. And I think that that will help to mitigate concerns about the scale of the development, the speed that it's going to happen or not, and how you guys can plan for it. So in this next phase, there are approximately 70 units, and they're all independent living units, meaning everybody's able-bodied and able to live day to day on their own. They are not designed or licensed as assisted living units. Then subsequent final development plans could come in for this more northern area, and that's where we would take from the land use budget. Again, we would further deduct from the land use budget, and if we ran out of units, then the next development phases would come online in the other areas, and we'd be coming back to you with a conceptual development plan and a final development plan in the same process that we're going through now. So with regard to questions on the BLAST, the buffer zone, as it's called out on our graphics, if development were to come in with a final development plan for that area, that would be when we would determine whether or not you guys are comfortable with how the development is planned there. The benefit of establishing, the overall zoning for this enables us to keep this maximum land use budget in place. So I know the Vice Mayor, you referenced, concern about coming back later and asking for more. And one of the ways that this larger rezoning, establishing the underlying zoning for the gross of it, is to say across this acreage, the maximum allowable units is this number. And we put that in the development agreement, and we put that in the zoning, and we're always deducting from that land use budget. Another layer of protection you have for that not increasing in the future is the fact that the Luke density line is an additional layer where unless something drastic happens with Luke, they will most certainly want to ensure that the densities within proximity to the base are acceptable to them. And we've worked very closely with Luke through the whole development of this plan, and they've seen every aspect of it. And, we would ensure that that continues into the future. Then finally, the stipulation that the Vice Mayor honed in on. So we noted this as different from Camelback because it did have this timing stipulation, which there's not any real way for us to dedicate this right-of-way in advance of the effective date of the zoning ordinance. And after our engineer speaking with Woody and understanding the concern that we wanted to make sure, the city wants to make sure that it is able to get that right-of-way if it needs the right-of-way ahead of our development, we have proposed a revision to the language so that the dedication will be completed when required by the city engineer. And then we just leave it at that. If there's other language, I've provided this in advance to the city staff. If there's other language that we need to talk about, I think we can work that out between now and the next hearing. But the idea would be that the engineer would determine the timing for that.
May I, as long as we're talking about that, Carolyn, one of the things that I was concerned with was what happens if you don't. And I was going to add something like failure to dedicate when requested by the engineer will result in no future building permits being withheld or something like that, just so there's something to enforce the requirement.
Yeah, and so what Mayor and Council and Vice Mayor and Susan, what we could do, I mean, I would think that that would be covered in the development agreement. And so then you'd have a breach of contract as well. And we could say that, you know, no further permits are issued or whatever the threshold is, rather than having it be in the stipulation.
Well, the reason I wanted it in the stipulation is because under the statute, it gives the specific authority to require in a rezoning the dedications.
Okay, well, if we I think we can work out language.
Yeah.
You see where we're going with it. There wouldn't be a way for us to do that in advance of the effective date of the ordinance. So
No, you're right. This was standard language that I didn't pay that much attention to. Standard language that I've used before, but it can be fixed.
Great. And
Okay, are we ready for your questions, or do you have more to go through?
no, I'll stop there. I didn't want to wear out my welcome.
Can you go back one or two slides where you have a little bit further? It's further. Oh, right there. That's fine. Go back one. No, back to the one you.
That way.
Oh, right there. Stop right there. Okay, so you have agritourism as part of what this 82 acres. There's 43 acres of agritourism, and it's the corner of Litchfield and Camelback. Is that right?
That's correct.
And in that area is up to 173 doors. Is that what this is telling us?
That is correct. However, what we're showing on the conceptual development plan is that there are no units in that area. So that if we were to change it to add dwelling units to the agritourism area, that would have to come back to you. This is simply a farm to fork retail village with market stand concept. And I'm sure Paul would love to elaborate for you all on what they've been working on there for that.
I want to make sure I understand what we are approving if we approve this ordinance. So if we approve this ordinance, we're not approving that 173 or?
Correct.
Correct?
Right. So the maximum budget that you would be allowed under the zoning would be 173, but this development plan does not deduct any units from that budget because it does not include any residential units within that development plan. It's purely a purely a retail and restaurant and farm use.
Within that, it says that area is actually 43 acres. So 173 units in 43 acres is not, it doesn't like jump out and make, it doesn't raise huge concerns, but if you congregate all of those 173 units in a very small area, then all of a sudden we've got a 4-story apartment building on the corner. And I'm kind of wondering what do we have in here that specifies what these 173 are going to be if you're going to come ask for them?
Well, so in that particular area, under the use, under the agritourism, that would only be permitted by use permit if we were going to come in and to do residential over the retail. And so we have those heights. So in addition to having to come back and amend the development plan with you all, we would also have to get a use permit.
And just so you are subject to a use permit so that it's not this is not a entitled right to 173 without approval?
If it is,
the ability to say no if we want to.
So mayor and council members, it's a bit more nuanced than that. So the use permit pertains to apartments. Continuum of care is treated differently. So apartments would be non-continuum of care apartments. So the use permit would apply to only the apartments. But if we were to add continuum of care units to this orange agritourism area, that would require coming back through this process, which is effectively a zoning process, changing the development plan to allocate units to that, which would mean that that budget then would be reduced. Right now, we are not proposing any units there, and given this development layout, it's unlikely that that would be a location for them. But you are doing nothing today to approve any units in that location at all. We would have to come back to you specifically in order to add units there. We would only ever ultimately have the right to ask for up to 173. But again, we'd still have to come back through a zoning process to ask you for that. So this proposed development plan that we're dealing with tonight is for 239 units total across all of the acreage. And that is in addition to obviously the units that are there now, which are the 152 within this area, which is approximately 15 acres. So I know you're doing some density math, just so you can have that for comparison. But so this full development plan, the 82 acres, contemplates 239 units.
Okay, then just one other question. And this is something that I apparently missed in one of these presentations that you've already told us. But can you tell me what happened with the concept of a farm up in the area that's where there's no building because of the blast zone buffer?
I've got Paul available who
I can answer that one. And I can also shed light on a few things if I'm granted the opportunity. Paul Vanderveen, Vice President, Sun Health, 14719 West Grand Avenue. Mayor, thank you for the question on that. We like that area. We thought that might be good, but there's a large slope to that area that leans back towards the base, and that is fallow ground. It's rocky ground. It's never been farmed, and it does not have a lot of soil material that meets that. And it does not meet the state's requirement for agriculture. The reason we have, if you can go back to our, if you can go back to the AT, Carolyn, thank you. The reason that rectangle for the farm is sort of left of Denny Boulevard there is, if you recall, that's the historic orchard. And that is the reason we are allowed to actually produce farm there, is because it is a historic orchard. The historic orchard actually went towards the medical office building and our first IL building, but we've developed that land. So we, unless we tore that up, we could get it back. But other than that, we've lost it for good. So we can't work that area in the blast zone for those reasons. And the reason we are looking at the farm there is because it is historical and it does meet the development rights under the state's ag and water and all those requirements.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious what happened, and because I didn't remember it being expressed why it had just gone away. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, we would have liked to have done a few more things. And Carolyn and Mayor, if you'd let me, may I address a few of the issues that we've talked about tonight from our perspective?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, Mayor, since we're sort of talking towards that direction, if you look at that blast zone and you look back towards the blue area, you see an arrow that leads from the hilltop towards that rectangle, that blast zone.
Yes.
In the current plan, Mayor, I wanted to make sure that you saw that arrow. That is the visual corridor from the Sunset Terraces. You know, our plan that we're showing you here today has a low parking lot below that terrace and has a building off to the side, so we're not blocking those views. You know, we've taken everything that council has said over the last 4 years, and we've really tried to address all these things. We've come in and we went to Luke 4 years ago, and Luke actually had blessed us with more density. When we came back a few years ago with the updated version, Luke said, you know, we didn't really care for that. And so we honored that with Luke. And not only did we honor that, we put that dark line on our plan to make sure that Luke understood that we were telling the world, we agree with the density calculations and we want to work with that. We talked to them about the blast zone at the time, and we are open to, the berming is a subject that's come up before, and I think there's technicalities against the berming that are ineffective, but we're not against looking at ways to not mimic the Goodyear side of how that looks and how that is, because I think we have concerns as well, and I think we can adapt that much better. You know, we were instrumental in looking at the Historical Society, working with the Farm and Ranch Museum and bringing them to the hilltop, because we see the hilltop as an amenity. So everything around that hilltop is a concern of ours because it is part of Rancho La Loma, other than the city owns it. even Mayor, we've talked about Aunt Mary's house before, and I want to assure you that, right now we have several plans for Aunt Mary's house. So even if one of those fails, I think we have some other plans that Aunt Mary's house is part of this project.
And I
There is-
think that's good to point out, just in the agritourism plan that is shown in the conceptual development plan. Aunt Mary's house is contemplated to remain.
Yeah, and that's a win. I really think that that's part of the history of Rancho La Loma. And if you look at our logoing and if you look at everything we're trying to do, we're definitely trying to restore and commit to the things that made Rancho La Loma an important part of the West Valley. The success of the West Valley, I've said it before, runs through that hilltop. And I think we own it. We owe the Denny family, we owe the Litchfields, we owe that heritage, and we owe the city of Litchfield Park to maintain this property in a manner of that way. We're community, the Recreation and Community Event Center is a sales tax event center. So there will be, that restaurant is open to the public. There will be sales tax collected. The events that are not nonprofit will be sales tax collected. The things that we are looking at on this corner are sales tax collected. And over the 4 years, we've tried to bring this in several different ways. And I think it was too vague and at times probably too big. And I think that was one of the things we heard from the city in the last go around is maybe we're trying to bring in too much vagueness, too much bigness. Can you bring it down into something more digestible? And so we brought it down into something more digestible. We brought it down into what we think gives us some running room for our senior living, gives us that commercial that we can go out and get these people to look at this agritourism commercial. And we do have a few in the mix, but we need to get our zoning in order to go out and do that. We have $28 million that we did a bond funding last November that is right now burning in our accounts that we need to spend and develop on these buildings. And right now we are trying to build 5 of these buildings in that area. And that's part of our package that we've submitted to DRB. So we're ready to build, we're ready to do things. And I'm not against continuing with what the city's done before on their with their pathing and other things. You got to remember, in this area of senior living, our speed limit is 12.5 miles an hour. We're not residential neighborhoods as common in your other areas of the city. Now, outside of this area, I think we will be very common to what the city is, and I think we're very open to matching those types of developments. We are willing to work with the city, and I think in the last few months, Mayor and Council, we've really come together, and we really have moved some things forward. We've dealt with COVID that set both of us back on this course, and I think we've been able to move some things in the positive direction over the last few months. And I know that some of the council people, when they were up for election, they called Sun Health a partner with the city, and I like that aspect because we can't go away. We are not a developer that can come in like across the street and go away. We are not Cachet Homes that can come in and develop something and go away. Anything that's developed here, we own the base. We are here, and we are here to stay with the city, and hopefully as a good partner where this agritourism and our community works towards that hilltop, and that hilltop gets restored through these efforts and becomes an amenity to the city that helps bring more attention to your downtown. So that's what I'm asking for tonight.
Thank you for the further information. Are there questions from the council for either Carolyn or Paul?
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah, Councilman Clare.
the 173 doors in the agritourism area, if that's not used, is that able to be reallocated into the other 2 portions of the project?
Mayor, would you like me to address that?
Whichever one of you would like to address it,
Yep.
please go forth with great gusto.
So the density is calculated not just on a per on each side of the line, but by the color. So the homestead color is the blue, the core is the green, the orange has its own. The orange, it being agritourism, is separate. So that density does not get reallocated. It can only go in that area. So if it's
Mayor-
unutilized, it's unutilized.
Mayor, may staff ask for a clarification, please?
Yes, go ahead, Jason.
Carolyn and Paul, in the permitted use table, you're showing non-continuum of care apartments allowed as a use, subject to obtaining a use permit. That's 173 prospective apartment units that could go in a complex that's not affiliated with Sun Health Wellness Services. That's just a regular apartment complex. Can you explain that? We've never actually had that conversation.
So two things. An additional use permit use that would count towards the 173 is a hotel. So in the permitted uses table, under the orange section, there are two uses called out for use permit. One is the hotel and one are the apartments. And Jason, this is going back a long time to when we developed this use list originally. But the idea for the use permit was tied to the provision in the code that allows for that in a mixed use environment where it is apartments over retail. And so that is what the use permit would be governed against, are those standards in the code.
And just to add that whether it's a leased unit or not, it's still, a leased unit, whether it's an apartment, would still have that base healthcare element of what base set of goods that we'd offer on our continuum of care.
So you're talking about like Verado. They had what they started as condos, but now they're apartments in downtown area up above retail, like lofts, right?
That's correct. Or again, those units could also be hotel rooms. So the way that density is considered for the purposes of the Luke graduated density and what we've written into the development standards is that a hotel room actually counts as a dwelling unit as well. So if there's a hotel, there would be a use permit. If there are apartments, there would be a use permit. And all of it counts towards the 173.
Okay, any other questions from council? I can't see everybody, so if you have a question, let me know.
Just clarifying, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, it's Ron.
Yeah. Go ahead, Councilman Claire.
Just making sure that I'm hearing this right, because I'm new to the dance, I guess, is potential discussion of a hotel going in this property.
It could possibly, but that's not one of the uses that we've had approach us. It was just one of the uses that we talked about back years ago. And it is a possibility in a future, but again, like Carolyn said, it would come under a use permit if it came under. It's not in a current plan, and that's why it's not represented on the drawing today.
And again, the conceptual development plan that is a part of this package would be what a future final development plan would be judged against unless this is amended. So if a package were to come to this council or a future council and it would include any units allocated to that orange budget, that would be a revision to the development plan. And that would have to go and be amended on its own.
So I just want to be sure I understand. I'll avoid my speech about use permits, but an amendment to a final development plan will continue to be a legislative act within the sound discretion of the council. And only if the development plan is amended to perhaps add density, 173 density to that development plan, only after that's approved would a use permit be considered, which is not necessarily able to be denied. So first comes the legislative act, then comes the application for a use permit.
You know, Susan, from a logistical standpoint, I would think that I haven't even looked at what the use permit process is, if it automatically goes to council, or if it's just appealed to council. So I suppose there's a scenario where the use permit could go, if it is only appealed to council, that it could go to planning commission, but it'd be subject to final development plan approval with the council, just as every other aspect of this property would be. Is that how you're seeing it?
Actually, yes, just to be sure that the legislative act, that's the amendment to the development plan, is separate from the use permit. I just want to be sure that's clear, because my speech about use permits is that they can't always be denied. You don't have unlimited discretion with respect to use permits. And I just want to make sure the framework, because I may need to do a little bit of, I just want to be sure the framework is understood.
So Susan, under this zoning, hotels are allowed?
By
Jason?
No, I'll add to this. So I think it's important to remember the history when this started was agritourism was envisioned as a farm to fork, rurally themed, mixed use environment where boutique hotels and cottagey style, whether they're attached or detached, little condo units would be permitted subject to discretionary approval of the council with a use permit. So that's where it all started once upon a time. My question earlier was to make sure that we wouldn't inadvertently throw out on the line the possibility of an apartment complex, which was never the intent of AT. So what I'm getting at and I'm hearing is that that's not their development intent. It would be, they're just bringing over from agritourism the same types of concepts of hotels and limited multifamily units in an integrated farm to fork environment where you've got a mix of uses where it's an enjoyable place to go recreate or even live in small, limited amounts of units. But yes, hotel would be allowed.
The key here, Ron, is that, or Councilman Clare, is that before the hotel could ever be built, there has to be a legislative act by the council to approve the change. And legislative acts, the reason we like them is that we have discretion to go either way on it. We can say yes or no. So the council would have the ability to say no.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other questions or comments from council? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and you're going to hear me knock. Public hearing is closed. We will go on to make sure I'm not skipping anything here. We'll go on to a consideration of the rezoning ordinance for 322 acres at the northwest corner of Litchfield Road and Camelback Road. This is a possible action to introduce this ordinance. And just to remind everyone, the introduction is not passing the ordinance. It is simply getting it out there so that a month from now we can consider passing it. Before it will come back to the council for passage, there will be a development agreement that will be finished and it will be brought, the development agreement will be brought back to council at the same time as consideration of actually passing this ordinance. So is there any further discussion on the question of introducing the ordinance? Seeing none, is there a motion? Is that a motion from Vice Mayor?
No,
That was made?
that's a comment.
Okay, it's a comment. All right.
You know, I sat back and I asked my questions and I tried to, just sit back and listen to what Carolyn and Paul had to say. And my concern is with all the questions that we've asked, there still seems to be a lot of confusion on the city's part with all of our staff and representatives as to what the ramifications are as to what we're doing. In most situations, you don't give speculative zoning. You zone them for what it is they want to do right now so you can look at it and move forward with it. I struggle with the concept of rezoning the entire 320 acres, taking into consideration that they've told us that there's a lot of it will remain open space and will not be developed because of their density issues. Issues then pop up as then why are we rezoning it? Why don't we rezone it to open space? And the response probably is, well, I don't know where that would go exactly yet. I don't have a problem supporting Sun Health. I would like to see them do what they want to do. I don't have a problem with going forth with approving the things that they want to build now. I have a problem giving 320 acres of speculative zoning based upon a bunch of agreements that I'm not sure anybody totally understands, and what the possible ramifications to that may be in the future. Thank you.
Councilman Brainerd Watson.
You know, there's so many aspects of this that are unique that make this project one that we can't just look to someone else for an example and see how they acted. You know, the fact that it backs up to Luke Air Force Base with that blast zone. I mean, how many projects are developed right up against a blast zone? The fact that it's essentially one of our last areas to develop in our community, and so really important to us. The ownership is different than most planned developments, you know, where the builder comes in and they or the developer comes in, they develop the property and then sell off parcels, and at any point in time they can liquidate and walk away from it. You know, their ownership is different. The city's partnership with owning a parcel located in the middle of this is different. So I think we have to be able to, I think we have to look at this with fresh eyes and be willing to think outside the box, look outside the box. I understand what Vice Mayor Faith is saying about the concerns about not knowing where everything is going to be and things like that, but it's kind of, but I also see the opposite argument that if we're asking them to come in and, you know, provide some of the infrastructure that's going to have to be done, the loop of a road, you know, they have to have some idea that they're going to be able to develop the property out the way that they want to. And yet putting it all down on paper right now is probably, you know, too far out in advance for that kind of a development. So I think we just have to kind of, excuse me, trust, and we have to answer as many questions as we can and get commitments where we can get commitments. I think they've done a pretty good job about doing that. I think we've got some areas we need to button up with things that are going to be handled legally before we meet again next month. But I think moving forward in good faith at this stage of the game, it only lets us talk about it more and lets us put it on the agenda to, you know, see what kind of changes have been made between now and next month and where we can go from there.
Councilman Donahue.
Actually, I'm going to confirm a little bit of what Lisa says, but my other feeling is this how development happens? I mean, they've got details on one piece and clearly own the whole piece. And it just makes sense to me that they build it in phases. And, you know, I agree with Lisa. We have a very different council now than we did in the past. And I too would just like to see us trust that, as Paul Vanderveen said, it's a very different situation than we've dealt with in the past, where they own the whole thing, and it isn't similar. My other concern, I don't know, is that I know they've waited a long time, and granted, COVID was in the middle of that, so we can't, you know, this is not the same as before. But if they had to come back and redo this, does it take just as long? And is it, you know, does it stifle development? So in my opinion, I confirm what Lisa says. I think that I'd like to see us just trust that this process is going to complete and it will end up being awesome.
Councilman Clare.
I want to be able to be a partner and trust in every way that we can. I think Sun Health has an opportunity to be a great partner with us. But I hate surprises. And this idea of a hotel and an apartment would have never been brought up if I didn't ask about those 173 doors and what was going to happen with them. And that's a surprise to all of us. And there has to be a willingness to be open about what the plan is, because right now it feels like we're trying to sneak things and force things and finesse things in a way to get by. And I would rather there just be open clarity and tell us what you want so that we can work with it and then live by it. Don't try and sneak things through, because that's that doesn't bode well from my eyes. I want clarity. I don't want to find things because all of a sudden something just popped up and it was a question and then we've got three people talking about different things. I don't like that. I want clarity in what you're bringing to us so that we know what's going on, so there's no surprises.
Councilman Donahue.
Actually, I thought I looked at the plan and I thought it did say hotel on there. And I assumed it had to do with, when you have a 55 and over and your parents are in a 1-bedroom, these are people that come to visit and you stay in a hotel. I know that that's often part of these kind of a development. So I actually saw that on the plan and I thought that made sense, especially in a 55 and over where you have elderly and family members coming to visit and they have opportunities to be able to stay close.
Councilman Brainerd Watson.
I actually kind of remember even in one of our previous conversations, that being one of the statements that was made that there might come a time when people would want some sort of hotel space available for families coming to visit, and that might be an option. And so I do think that they've told us that before. In all fairness to Councilman Clare, it was probably in meetings or in sessions when we've been together and talked about this months and months and months ago. And he may not have been part of the council at that point in time.
Councilman Stoll, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, just a question of clarification. My understanding is if we approve the motion that's likely going to be before us today, that we actually aren't approving anything. We're just continuing the process. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, the process is we have to introduce an ordinance on this topic, with certain specificity to it. And then next month we'll come back and we'll take a look at that ordinance and decide if we want to adopt it as it's currently written or with modifications or not at all. Any other questions or comments? All right, well, I think that we're ready to go forth with a motion to introduce, but with maybe just a general comment from my standpoint that this is an introduction only as far as I'm concerned, and there are some questions that will need to be more fully addressed in this next month. We've got to get the development agreement finished, which has within it has some issues that need to be finally resolved. And if there are any council members, such as the vice mayor or Councilman Clare, that have particular issues you're concerned about, then please communicate them into staff so that we can see if there are any things that we need to work on in the next month as we finally get this buttoned up to the point where maybe it will be acceptable, to the council. So please don't let this sit on the back burner for the next month and then come back at the next meeting and say, oh my God, we didn't talk about all this stuff. Let's try to get it handled as we can throughout the month through a normal process. So when we come back, we've got something that answers your questions. Whether you like the answer or not is one thing, but at least it will answer the questions. So with that, is there a motion to introduce this ordinance? Councilman Brainerd Watson moves to introduce. Is there a second?
Second.
Councilman Donahue seconds. Is there any further discussion on the introduction of the ordinance? If not, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposed? So the ordinance is introduced and we'll put it back in staff's hands to try to sort through some of the questions that I think hopefully everybody understands, the ones that need to be addressed in this next month. Okay, next item is an introduction to ordinance 20-245, which is an exchange of real property between the city of Litchfield Park and one of our downtown property owners to get our property boundaries to make more sense around the commercial area and the downtown area. So Engineer Woody, would you like to tell us what's going on? Maybe just a shorthand version, and then we'll see if there are any questions.
Yes, Mayor.
It's a relatively complicated problem, and it's one that's been kicking around as a problem for several years. So, but what it does is very simple. It realigns the property lines between the city property and the commercial property, the owner of the commercial property in the area of Old Litchfield Road and Wigwam. It is absolutely essential we get this done because it is negatively impacting some of our businesses down there because of issues about how they use their property, because they have to go across city property, you know, and that's not allowed in our liquor laws. So it's very important to get this done. It's highly technical, so I'm happy for you to make a simple presentation, then we'll see if there are questions, okay?
Mayor, I think you said it well. I can't really add anything. It's just the next step in the process to exchange the property. And we did, at your last meeting, you approved a notice of intent of property exchange. We published that, got no comments. So this is the next step.
Yeah,
And then in October, we'll bring the ordinance back for approval.
It's one of the few things that we need to do just to clean up the fact that we are a city that was formed from a company town, and all these property line things weren't particularly important when one entity owned everything. So are there any questions from council? Mr. Vice Mayor.
Just quickly, I presume, Susan, you're going to get title reports, and we're doing warranty deeds or whatever, and
Oh, yeah. This one of the exhibits attached is an agreement, and it serves as escrow instructions. So the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, is there a motion to introduce ordinance 20-245 to authorize the exchange of real property in the downtown area?
So moved.
Been moved by Councilman Rostosi. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Clare. Any further discussion? If not, then all those in favor of introducing the ordinance, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item is an intergovernmental agreement for the traffic signal at Litchfield Road and Camelback. Mr. Skelton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is just a cleanup item. At your last meeting in August, you approved this IGA, and then the county attorney discovered that we could not extend it to November 2025 because that exceeds the 5-year allowable extension that was in the original agreement. So all we're doing here is changing it to an expiration date of November 30th, 2023.
Any questions from council? Don, is there a motion to approve amendment number 1 to the IGA with Maricopa County for the operation and maintenance of the traffic signal at Camelback and Litchfield Road? Moved by Councilman Brainerd Watson, seconded by Councilman Rostosi. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, amendment is adopted. Next item is a waiver of traffic control permit fees and an intergovernmental Camelback. Mr. Scouten.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This was initiated by the county because they want to build a traffic signal at 127th Avenue and Camelback Road, and our 25-foot wide strip annexation runs through that intersection. So they know that they're going to have to set up traffic control in our city, and they'll have to get a permit to do that. They just don't want to pay the cost of the permit. And in return for that, they're offering the same thing to us, where if we have traffic control on one of our projects that spills over into their right of way, they won't charge us a permit for reviewing and approving that traffic control. And this agreement would be in effect through June 30th of 2022, so fiscal year 2022.
We can't take it back to the permit fees we had to pay when we built the underpass, right?
That'd be nice.
It's the last time we had to do that. Are there any questions from council about this intergovernmental agreement waiving these fees? If not, is there a motion to approve the intergovernmental agreement with the city of Goodyear to waive the fees for the traffic light at Actually, it's with Maricopa County, isn't it? Not the city of Goodyear.
That's right.
Maricopa County and our city to waive the fees for the permit for 127th Avenue and Camelback Road traffic signal. Moved by Councilman Donahue. Is there a second? Councilman Brainerd Watson. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries unanimously. Final item of business is a very important one, and that is a discussion of a matching funds program to clean up the dead wood around the hilltop. And this is presented by Mr. Williams.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. You may remember a few months ago, we applied for a hazardous fuels grant to clean up La Loma. Unfortunately, that grant was turned down because the property does not back up to forestry land and also does not back up to BLM land or Bureau of Land Management. So we were not awarded that grant, unfortunately. However, I was contacted by Russell Benford over the weekend. He's the hazardous fuels manager for the Department of Forestry and Fire Management, to let us know that we should consider applying for this grant. A big difference between this grant and the previous one, the last one was a 90-10 reimbursement grant. In other words, we would have paid for it up front, but it only would have cost us 9 or 10% when it was said and done. Again, we didn't get that one, but this grant is a 50-50 grant. However, they feel we've got a good shot at this one. And of course, it is the guy from the state that handles the grant we put in for this one. So if we were awarded this grant, we would pay a maximum of 50% or $32,500. And it can either be in cash or in kind, either one. And again, if we were awarded this grant, it would clean up the dead fuels around La Loma, the dead trees, overgrowth, remove the salt cedars, invasive species, etc. It would really reduce the fire dangers at La Loma, and that's something we should really consider. As you know, the historical structure and also the surrounding businesses. It would do a lot of good up there if we could get some of those fuels reduced. It would also make it much easier on our public works crews up there when they're up there working also. Certainly open for questions if there are any.
Questions from council? All right, well, I'm glad to see you're continuing to work on this. All you have to do is look at the hilltop and know that we've got the potential for a huge problem there. We need to get it handled. So,
yes, sir.
If there's no further discussion, is there a motion to approve applying for these matching funds to clean up the dead trees on Rancho La Loma? Moved by Councilman Watson. Is there a second? Councilman Josie, got a second from him? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, go apply for the grant and get us the money and get it cleaned up.
I'll do my best. Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Yep.
All right, everyone move to adjourn. So I know we got a motion and a second, and I know it passes. So thank you very much. It was a late night for everyone. We appreciate all your attention to the meeting, and we'll see you in a month or so. Thanks.
Ciao. Thank you, everyone.